Okay, I did the gavel thing. Okay. Happy New Year, and welcome to the special organizational meeting of the Colerain Township Board of Trustees for January 2nd, 2020. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and first I will call the roll. Mr. Rajagopal?
Here.
Mr. Unger?
Here.
And Mr. Wallert?
Here.
Okay. Go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then as well remain standing for a moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right, our first order of business this evening is to elect our board officers, our board president and vice president. So the first thing I will do is ask for nominations for the election of board president.
I nominate Trustee Hunger for president.
Okay. Is there a second to that nomination?
Madam Chair, I'll second that.
Are there any further nominations?
None.
None.
I shall close nominations then. Mr. Unger, do you accept such nomination?
I will if on a majority vote.
All right. All right. Now we need a motion and a second for that item.
I move the floor to
You would
appoint.
motion
You're making a motion
I make a motion to appoint Dane Hunger for the president of the board.
Madam President, I'll second that motion.
All right. Is there any
Roll
discussion?
call.
All
Not
right.
from I.
All right. Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you,
Excellent.
board.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is the election of board vice president.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to nominate Raj Kapel as Vice President.
And I will second Raj's nomination.
All right. Are there any further nominations?
Not from I.
All right. Hearing none, we will close nominations. Mr. Rajagopal, do you accept such nomination?
Aye. Yes.
Okay. All right. And now we need a motion and second for.
I would motion that we have Raj Rajagopal as the vice president of the Board of Trustees for 2020.
Madam President,
Yes.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. If there is no discussion, I will call the roll. Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Aye.
All right, congratulations. I will
Thanks, Raj.
Thank you, ma'am.
hand this over.
Congratulations.
to Mr.
Congratulations.
I didn't know that meant I'd have to sit next to you.
Well, it's too late. You already voted. It's not just tonight. It's for a whole year. So get ready.
You and Raj can switch, and you guys can fight over who gets to sit next to me.
Thank you, everyone. And our next item is organizational items. Administrator Mills.
Mr. Unger, thank you. Good evening, board. Happy New Year to you and to all those that are in attendance tonight. First item, we have several organizational items for consideration this evening. The first item is sort of championed by Trustee Wallert. Mr. Wallert, would you like to introduce this item?
Absolutely, thank you. So this is a resolution to establish rules of procedure for trustee meeting that I put together using Ohio Revised Code and a number of other townships that have rules. We did a survey of local townships, so it borrows somewhat extensively from those that have been successful and eliminates those that have not. The good thing for me for this is there's not a township in Hamilton County that currently has a codified set of rules. My reasoning for this is it sets out what any citizen or anybody addressing the board can expect, and what the board can expect the behavior the board will also display towards those that address. I've already received a number of emails of feedback, and it's my intention to make this a first reading and send it into a second reading. And if we need to continue until we get it right, we'll get it right. But for me, the point is to make something codified, to make it structured, and to make it so that everybody expects the same treatment. So I think that's the summary.
Thank you. So my understanding is no action is requested of the board this evening. It's just a matter of considering a resolution to establish rules of procedure for trustee meetings. Those draft rules of procedure were included in the agenda packet for consideration and debate.
And I did have one or two comments on the rules. I think that's fine. A lot of it is stuff we've already been doing, which is great. A couple of the things about codifying it is, for instance, on item 1, the board voting procedure calls for votes to be in the negative or affirmative, and just so people understand, you can also, the third vote could be to abstain from voting, and the word abstain was not in there, but it's understood that it would be. One of the new things would be, it mentions on item 2D that we could temporarily table a vote and have that vote later in the same meeting. And this is for further discussion. I guess we could do that. I think it's been the practice of the board the last 2 years that if something was tabled, it was kind of pushed off till the next meeting. So that would be different. On the order of business, it mentions a public hearing on page 5. The second reading and vote would be placed on the agenda at the following regular meeting. I think very recently with the license plate item that was up at our last meeting, that took 2 public hearings. So sometimes we have to have 2 public hearings for different things, and then the vote might not be at the following regular meeting. My term, 2018 term as president, and Raj did a great job with it in 19, the 5-minute limit. Sometimes we've let people go a little bit over that to get to their point that they were trying to make, and as board president, if I sense that, I would probably tend to give somebody an extra 30 seconds or a minute, or if I felt like they were getting somewhere, even more time than that, but I think that's a prerogative of the president. On item 11, it says trustee report at the invitation of the presiding officer. That one there, whoever the presiding officer is in years to come, I think all 3 trustees should get to have a trustee report regardless of if the presiding officer invites them, because I think in the past, in 2014 and 15, maybe, it seems like one of the trustees didn't always get a chance to speak, and going forward, I would always want to make sure all 3 trustees had a chance to speak. One of the other items was, it says no electioneering. I think in the past, as recently as the last election, if there were candidates in the audience, I did introduce them, and hopefully that's not electioneering. Or if I was to announce that I was going to run again in 2 years, or Raj was going to announce, I wouldn't consider that electioneering either. I would just consider that to be, here's a news flash, I'm going to run again. So other than that was what I caught on the first read on those procedures, and thanks for putting them together. And I'm sure that as time goes by, we'll work out some details on them. So those are my comments.
Thanks, Dan. My comment is, I really appreciate Matt going through extreme extents and work hard to put together the procedures, and it's a lot of work. I really appreciate taking time for this. And there's few things. First thing that I saw this procedure when it came in the agenda. I think all the trustees sit together and form some kind of discussion on the procedures, and make everybody on the same page. I like to do that. Also, like Dan mentioned about certain things, the trustees report, this needs to be, it's each trustee's responsibility is to give a report to the citizens what they do, what they want to do. It's going to be more elaborate things trustees can do. That's their opportunity to make their report as a presentation to the residents. I feel that all the trustees should go over again, either in the work sessions or some other type, and talk about this, have everybody agreed upon. That'd be a great idea to enforce these procedures. So I would like to table this, the first reading, and let's discuss more trustees during the meetings, executive sessions like that.
I would think we would go ahead and discuss this at the next meeting in open session.
That's right. Yeah. I don't know that we could go into executive session to discuss this, but I think that the idea is that have a conversation about it now and in the future, and then when the board feels ready to suggest changes, then we would make those changes and bring them back for consideration on a vote. Is that what you were thinking, Trustee Waller?
Actually, yes. I think it's important to have the second kind of open meeting on the 14th regarding, and then maybe take that feedback and go into a work session or something would be fine. That's an open meeting as well. And it's actually defined in the rules of procedure. Because there are some, like Mr. Unger pointed out and Mr. Rajgopal pointed out, my intention was not to limit who the presiding officer could invite to make a trustee report. So the language and some of that might be a little bit vague and needs some kind of sharpening up. And I think that point's well taken. So so my belief would be that we have the public time to kind of digest it and react. A number of people already have via email and things like that, and then take those any changes that come from that and put it together in a work session, I think.
Very good. Understood.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is a motion to adopt the 2020 strategic. Whoa, man, the strategic. That happens all the time. I need to fix this chair. Sure. The strategic plan and budget book. One of the goals of this administration is to align our financial resources with the work that we want to accomplish, and this means that we have to understand the priorities of our trustees and our residents. We need to articulate those priorities very clearly, in this case in the form of a strategic plan, and then align the financial resources of the township in the form of a budget to accomplish those priorities. So the document that is presented for a second time tonight articulates our strategic initiatives and summarizes our budget for 2020. This agenda item had a first reading at the December trustees meeting. It was a lengthy document, and so we wanted to make sure that the board and residents had a long time to digest it. The temporary appropriations were approved at the December trustee meeting, and this document really does serve as a work plan for our departments. And a communication tool to our residents to let folks know what it is that we're going to be working on in 2020. So the recommendation is to adopt a motion to adopt the strategic plan.
I will motion to approve the 2020 strategic plan and budget book so we can get it on the floor for discussion.
Yes, I second.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President, I believe at this point probably it would be best. I know that that delay is something that people don't appreciate, but I think it'd be important to table this. There are a number of changes in the budget book that I would like to make based upon preferences that I see and have it open for discussion. For example, there's a position that's funded for a transparency director of transparency, and that's something that I think should be discussed a little further. There's a budget item of, I think, $150,000 for the Colerain corridor for beautification project, and that would be something also that I'd be interested in discussing a little bit more. So for those reasons, I think that it should be tabled to the next meeting so that we can have a full discussion in the light of day on those issues.
Sure. Any discussion, Raj?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. I agree with Matt. This is a special organizational meeting, and we should focus on all the organizational matter. This strategic plan budget book is a big topic. We need to have the public input on this. I like to table this motion, have it in the regular meeting perhaps in the next meeting.
Fair enough.
And I'd like to comment as well. I'm not interested in adding any more to our census due to, the fact this is an expensive operation to run. The transparency person and the communications person, I'd like to have further discussion on that. We do need to have somebody here how many people do we have in the office? 7 or 8 total? And there's not always somebody there to answer the phone. And I think it was the will of the last board and possibly the will of this board that we would have somebody there to always answer the phone. We're pretty skinny in that office, and I understand that. One of the other things on there is on page 35. I'd like to point out that through our homeowners and businesses that subscribe to internet and cable TV services, we do collect about $720,000 in cable franchise fees every year. That's that little dollar or two that you see on your cable TV bill. Collectively, that provides a nice revenue stream for the township. It is through that revenue stream that we have Waycross come in and do a fabulous job recording our meetings and broadcasting them, whether you're on Optics or Spectrum Cable, or if you're watching online on waycross.org. I'd like to point out that's in the budget, and in my first 2 years here, and to this day, that's the only spending I have asked for outside of the norm, because I just think it's so critical to have these meetings professionally recorded and broadcast. On page 38, you might note that at the end of 2021, we're going to have $941,200 in bond debt go away. And I really appreciate the hard work of the administration and department heads, Jeff, in keeping spending where it is. And at the end of 21, we'll have a little bit of debt paid off and some extra revenue, which could, help us push any request for more revenue even further off into the future. So way to go on keeping that spending in line. One of the other things, people wonder what's going on in Colerain Township with our spending. What's our total budget? Around $39 million. And I think very recently we were discussing that our good friends over in Green Township, their budget's around $48 million. So we're a bigger township. I think more people, more land area, less spending. So I know we've been beating you on the head about that the last 2 years, but you're doing a great job, trying to keep things online. And sometimes when you look at our budget, you'll notice it has some swings, like between 18 and 19. We had some pretty nice grants for some subdivision reconstruction, and there's some years we get those grants and they might show as a bubble in our revenue and our expenditures, and then when the project's done a year or two later, there'll be a little bit more of a swing, and people need to look into it a little bit more to understand it, but that's why we get some swings in our budget. So those are my comments, and it sounds like, do we need to make a motion to table, Scott, or what?
Exactly. I didn't know. I was going to ask for clarification as far as if Trustee Ward made the motion.
Or should we just vote how we want to vote? If it goes down, then you can bring it back?
No, I'd say table it for the next meeting. That would be my recommendation, would be to table
Well,
it.
there should be a vote. Should you table it, second the tabling, and then go ahead and vote, roll call it?
So do we need a motion to withdraw, because Mr. Unger with motion to adopt. So I think we need a motion for Mr. Unger to withdraw and then table, right?
And Mr. Unger, if I could, before we get too far out of the discussion phase, I will note that there were actually 3 additional full-time employees that are proposed, and in this budget, there was the receptionist.
There's a police position, I think.
That was last year. This year, receptionist, the communications manager. There was no transparency director. There was in the first draft, and then in the subsequent, after hearing, the way folks were talking about, the transparency director might not be the preferred option. That was changed to communications director in response to our town hall meetings, where the number 1 and number 2 items of concern from our residents were sidewalks and better communications from the township. So that was why a communications director or manager was added. And then the third position was an additional maintenance worker in the public services department to work in parks, bringing their total number of full-time parks workers for our 240 acres of parks to 5.
Okay, and that'll be part of our discussion,
Right.
Subsequent discussions.
Yes. Now, just as in terms of process here, so if we table this to the 14th and then have a discussion, then we won't be able to make changes to that document before the 14th. So now we're looking into February for adoption of the strategic plan. I just want to make clear that's the timeline that we're on.
It's better to do it right.
Sure.
Hurry up and do it. Okay. I think we'll do that reading and put it on the agenda on the 14th, then be finalized in February meeting.
Okay, very good.
Just a couple of weeks.
So I guess the recommendation would be for a motion to withdraw and then a motion to table.
Yeah.
I would motion that we withdraw the motion to adopt.
I'll second.
Is there any discussion?
None?
Raj?
None.
Heather?
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Aye.
I know.
I'll motion to table the strategic plan and budget book until the 14th.
February? Or
January.
January. January.
Yep.
I will second. Is there any discussion?
None.
Hearing none. Heather?
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Very good, thank you, Board. Next item on the agenda is a motion to approve the 2020 regular meeting dates for the Board of Trustees. We would be keeping the same regular meeting dates as last year, and what I mean by that is we would be holding one meeting per month on the second Tuesday of January, February, and March, and November and December. And then in April, May, June, July, August, and September, and October, we would have two regular meetings per month on the first and fourth Tuesdays of the month. That's consistent with the 2019 schedule, and it's those dates are listed on page 211 of the agenda packet. So the recommendation is a motion to approve the 2020 regular meeting dates for the Board of Trustees, and that all meetings of the Colerain Township Board of Trustees be held in accordance with Ohio Revised Code and sunshine laws, and that 24 hours notice be given to news media with the exception of emergency meetings.
I would motion that we do such a thing.
I second it.
Is there any discussion?
None?
Raj?
None.
And none from I. Heather?
I'm sorry, who offered the second? Was that Raj?
I did.
Okay. So, Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Aye.
I'm going to give a copy of the motion language to fiscal officer.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Board. Next item on the agenda is a motion to approve the continuation of employment and payment for part-time employees at the current rates. Each year, we adopt a motion to continue the service of part-time employees at their current pay rates. Recommendation is to approve that motion.
Mr. President? I'll motion to approve the continuation of employment and payment of part-time employees at the current rates.
I second it.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Heather, please call for a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. The next item is a motion appointing members of the Tax Incentive Review Committee. Recommendation is to appoint Mr. Jeff Baker and Ms. Rachel McKinney as representatives to the Hamilton County Tax Incentive Review Committee. Ms. McKinney has served as the representative of the township on this committee since January of 2018, and Mr. Baker is currently the township's fiscal officer-elect, and so seems uniquely situated to take on that role.
I would motion that we do such a thing.
I will second.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
None.
None?
Heather, please call a vote.
Before I call the roll, I'd like to recognize Mrs. McKinney. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. The next item on the agenda is a motion to appoint representatives to the Solid Waste Management District Policy Committee. Recommend the appointment of Trustee Rajagopal to the Solid Waste District Policy Committee. Trustee Rajagopal has served as the representative to this board since January of 2018.
I would motion that we appoint Rajagopal as a representative to the Solid Waste Management District Policy Committee.
I will second.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Heather, please call a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. Next item on the agenda is a motion to appoint members of the Board of Directors of the Colerain Township, City of Cheviot Joint Economic Development District Number 1. Recommend the appointment of Mr. Chris Boehm to a 4-year term on the Board of Directors of the Colerain Township, City of Cheviot Joint Economic Development District 1 to serve as the worker member. Also, recommend the appointment of Trustee Matt Wallert to the Board of Directors of Colerain Township, City of Cheviot Joint Economic Development District 1 to serve as the Township member to fill the unexpired term of Trustee Greg Insko, which would expire in 2021. Mr. Boehm has served as the worker rep on this board since 2015, and Trustee Wallert would fill the unexpired term of former Trustee Insko.
I would motion that we appoint those members as Administrator Mills has described.
I second it.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
None.
None.
Hearing none, Heather, please call a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. The next item on the agenda is a motion to appoint representative and alternate to the Board of Directors of the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments. Recommend the appointment of Trustee Unger as the representative to the Board of Directors of the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments, and Mr. Mills is his alternate, myself. Mr. Unger has been the representative since January 2018, and I've been the alternate since 2016.
So motion. A motion to appoint representative and alternate to the Board of Directors of the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments.
I second it.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Heather, please call a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. The next item is a motion to authorize the administrator to sign purchase orders equal to or less than $2,500. State law allows township trustees to delegate the authority to sign purchase orders with a value equal to or less than $10,000 to the township administrator so that business can be conducted efficiently. In 2019, the Board of Trustees chose to delegate their authority to sign purchase orders with a value equal to or less than $2,500. And all purchase orders that are above $2,500 then require 2 signatures of trustees in order to be certified.
I would motion that we authorize the administrator to sign purchase orders equal to or less than $2,500.
I'll second it.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President, I would like, I have a couple questions for Mr. Mills regarding this. So one of the things that I've gotten a number of contacts about why is it 2,500 and then 10,000? Why are they not aligned? I guess, and perhaps it'd be helpful for folks to understand why those are different amounts.
Because that's what the board chooses. So, it would make it more efficient for the administrator to be able to sign purchase orders up to $10,000. But the board's discretion in the past has been to limit that to $2,500. Increasing that to $10,000 would make things run more efficiently.
Is there another check and balance involved by limiting it to 2,500?
The fiscal officer has to certify that the funds are available, so there is that check.
Okay.
And the Board of Trustees appropriates all the money according to the budget that is presented, and so the idea is that the board appropriates the money, and then we open POs to pay vendors to execute, the strategic plan that you all adopt.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion?
I think we decide that 2,500 is, say, the time for expedite paying the bills. I think that's appropriate.
Sure. It is predicated on you guys coming in and signing POs pretty frequently. Yeah. Yep.
And I'm always in here to.
Yes, you are. Yes, sir.
3 evenings a week to sign those, and I know last year you had asked that would be increased, and the board decided it would be at 2,500 again, so that's what you brought forward, and that's all my comments I have on it. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Heather, please call a vote.
Before I call the vote, I would mention that there are a couple purchase orders in your bin to be signed.
I was just here the other night and signed.
Well, I opened them this afternoon.
Please call roll.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
All right.
Thank you, Board. The next item on the agenda is a motion to set fees for shelter reservations and community center rentals. You'll recall that this item was on the agenda at the December meeting and was tabled to this meeting for the purpose of eliminating a $5 increase. That $5 increase has been eliminated, and now we see a schedule of rental fees that hopefully reflects what you guys are looking to do. Recommend adoption of a motion to modify the fee schedule.
I motion that we set fees for shelter reservations and community center rentals as described on the agenda.
I second it.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Heather, please call a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. The next item on the agenda is a motion to accept the Ohio Plan's proposal for property and casualty liability insurance. Let's see, our property and casualty liability insurance broker is Hylant. They brought us the attached proposal from Ohio Plan for property and casualty liability insurance for 2020. The proposed premiums for 2020 increased slightly over 19's premiums by 1.7%, or $3,965. Our increase in premiums from 19 to 20 are $224,975 in 19 to $228,940 in 2020. The recommendation is to adopt such a motion.
I would motion that we accept the Ohio Plan's proposal for property and casualty liability insurance. Bring it to the floor.
I'll second it.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I have, Mr. President. Do we take any other quote on that insurance? Any other bid? I mean,
This was,
bids?
the last time that property and casualty insurance was competitively bid was 2016.
Okay.
And typically what you see in the market is the market doesn't fluctuate on an annual basis. And so we typically look to rebid it every 4 or 5 years, which means that we would look to rebid and go through an RFP process in 2020 for 2021's premiums.
So you believe this is pretty much reasonable?
It's more than reasonable. It's about $20,000 less than what we were paying in 2016. So we're doing well.
Thank you.
There had been a question about listing some other properties that the township owns on our insurance form. And it's my understanding that our insurance covers us at any one of our properties that we own, including any fire station, this building, any one of our parks, any properties that we are currently holding that are located within Colerain Township.
Yes, sir.
And that's just to clarify, I had seen a question about what there is a big, long list of our properties. If anybody wants to see the properties that we own, and you go to Auditor Dusty Rhodes' website and type in Colerain Township, you will see a long list. Some of it is little slithers of land that are at the end of a subdivision, or it's actually the subdivision street, or it's the firehouse or whatever, but it's a pretty big list of properties, and this just covers any property that Colerain Township trustees own, that
Sure.
the Board of Trustees owns. No other comments from me. Did you have any comments, Mr. Waller?
Just one very quickly. So with regard to competitive bidding, this is an exemption
Yep.
to that? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
But it's a good practice to do like I said, as the market fluctuates, it's a good practice to do every 4 or 5 years, just to keep everybody with their pencils sharp.
And as you said, it's $20,000 less than it was 4 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have any other comments?
No, thank you.
Raj? Heather, please call for a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. Get to the next item here. Next item is a resolution authorizing the administrator to execute contracts with a value less than or equal to $10,000. And I am trying to get there real quick. There we go. And it appears as though the actual resolution was not included in the agenda packet, but very good. So the resolution is called a resolution amending Resolution 4-18, authorizing administrator to execute contracts with a value equal to or less than $10,000. And it says, whereas on January 9th, 2018, the Board of Trustees adopted Resolution 4-18, granting administrator authority to execute contracts with a value equal to or less than $7,500. And whereas last year, on January 22nd, 2019, the Board of Trustees adopted a motion granting the authority to execute contracts with a value equal to or less than $10,000. And whereas the Board of Trustees has determined that in order to ensure the efficient administration of Colerain Township business, it is necessary to grant the administrator authority to execute contracts with a value equal to or less than $10,000. Therefore, be it resolved, the Board hereby grants the administrator the authority to execute contracts with a value equal to or less than $10,000. The difference between doing it by resolution and doing it by motion is that when we do it by resolution, we don't have to bring this up every year. It just carries. So, and the difference, the reason that it was changed from 2018 for $7,500 to $10,000 in 2019 is because state law changed, and that increased the amount that could be delegated. So the recommendation is to approve that resolution.
Before we take a motion on it, I'm going to ask Scott, it is advertised on our agenda. However, I'm looking here electronically, and that was not attached. So you're okay with it? It's been properly advertised and noticed? Okay, well, based on your consult, I will go ahead and motion that we authorize the administrator to execute contracts for the value of equal to or less than $10,000. I will motion that to get it to the floor.
I'll second it.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yes, I have one. I think last year, when enforced this 10,000, and you did it very well, very carefully. So there was no part in misuse this privilege.
Right.
So I think we continue to do that.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, and just to be clear, all of the contracts that I sign that are under $10,000, I then put on the next agenda in the consent items. You've already delegated that authority to me to sign them, but in the interest of transparency and letting you and the residents know that what contracts are being signed, we publish those in our agenda packets. So it's very clear, and we've had a situation over the holidays where I needed to invoke that privilege, as you described it, to keep operations going here, and we would that was a good example of why we need this.
Okay, so we've motioned and seconded.
No, we're in the
Is there
discussion.
other discussion?
Yeah.
Did you have any other discussion?
Yeah, I'm done.
Matt?
No, I just probably just kind of reflect what Raj said. Yeah, I appreciate this does make it a little bit less efficient. I realize that, but I think it increases the number of times that we put it out there, and that's, to me, that's worth the trade-off. So I appreciate the fact that in many of these things you're maybe doing kind of double duty with it, but I think it's significant in that it allows our constituents an opportunity to look at it on multiple occasions. So thank you so much.
Is there any other discussion?
None.
Hearing none, Heather, please call for a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye?
Mr. Waller?
All right.
Thank you, Board. And the next item on the agenda is a resolution adopting the organizational chart and job descriptions. You'll recall that the board, I believe it was last year, adopted a policy book that included policy for hiring. Let me see here. So the recommendation is to adopt a resolution establishing a table of organization, position roster, and job descriptions for the township. Changes that are made from 19 moving into 20. There is a new job description that is created here for communications manager, a new job description that's created here for receptionist, minimum qualifications update for director of finance. We made minor text edits to the assistant township administrator, office manager, assistant fire chief of administration, director of public services, and firefighter EMT. Now, recognizing that you all have said earlier in this meeting that you have issues with the communication manager potentially, or you'd like to discuss the communication manager position a little bit more, maybe this item isn't ripe and should be tabled to the 14th also for discussion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
if that's the best way to do it, Scott?
I
Yes.
would think so.
So do you?
So we have such a motion.
You don't want to adopt something that you're going to change right away, so I think it makes
Right.
sense to.
So how would we facilitate communicating that formally to the administrator without bringing it to the floor? Or it sounds like you've gathered that they're speaking to each one of us here, that the communications thing, we need to talk about that a little further.
It sounds like that. So it sounds like
Pull that off.
recommendation would be to table it for next meeting.
I guess that would come up in the discussion about tabling it, so I'll go ahead and motion to
Yeah.
table it, and then we can talk about why.
Sure.
Would that be good? So I would motion that we table that item.
I'll second that.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
Mr. President, I just think it would be inappropriate to deal with this resolution when we hadn't dealt with the strategic plan and budget book. And I think it needs to be aligned that we do it at the same time.
Yep.
So I think it makes good sense.
And that would be specific to the other positions, but the one that seems to have caused the most conversation is the adding a paid position of communications director. I would ask that in the next couple of weeks, we're already paying Waycross to film and document everything we do. Perhaps there's some way we could get them to help get our message even further out. Their contract right now is to professionally film and broadcast our events. But because they have such a finger on what's going on here, maybe there's a way that you can communicate with Waycross and say, hey, is there a way that you could put together, aside from our normal contract with them, some additional ways of getting out what's going on in the township, whether it's through their vast array of connections in the media. I've seen stories on 5/9/12/19 where they actually use footage that they get from Waycross and use it as a part of their news broadcast. And if we were to go that route, we could try that out for a year, and it would probably cost a lot less than the communications manager position. And if a year went by and we didn't like it, then in 21, we could do away with it, and maybe we would at that point want to get a communications person. But my idea for you to consider, Jeff, is to think about if there's some way we can get Waycross to go beyond the contract that we currently have with them and allow them to use the footage that we're already paying them to gather at our events and our meetings and the other things that they do here with the township. I know, Matt, you very recently went out there and did your first I'm from Colerain, here's what's happening show.
Yes.
Which I haven't gotten up the emotional strength to watch that yet. But I know that you did that because I think I saw a little link to it. But that would be my suggestion, Jeff, is communicate with Waycross and see if there's something we could do with our contract with them that would fulfill your desire to get more information out about the township, and we wouldn't have to add a full-time paid position for that. So that's my idea. Did you have any comments, Raj?
No.
So the goal of the communications manager, like I said, was to be responsive to the residents saying we want to be communicated with more. And so the idea is that person or organization would create press releases. They would manage our communications via Circle. They would do all of our social media work and make sure that there's one sort of unified voice that is the township's voice in communicating with residents, multi-platform, multimedia, and yeah, there's lots of different ways to skin that cat. This has been the second year in a row that communications has been identified as a weakness for the township by our residents. And so last year in 19, we presented a contract for communication because we felt like that was a more cost-efficient way of dealing with this. So this year, we heard again that communications was a big weakness of this organization, and so we presented a director of transparency because we also heard that folks want more timely access to records, for example. We had, 600 and something records requests last year. And I heard at the December meeting from the board and residents that director of transparency was not something that we wanted to do, so we changed that to communications manager. And so, I guess really what I need is guidance. I'm hearing and trying to be responsive to the residents, but you guys just need to tell me if that's not a priority to you guys, that's fine, or if it is a priority and you want to accomplish it a different way, just let me know so I'm not
Sure, and you've heard from me that I say, talk to Waycross and see if there's something else that they can do. I would also say this, I'm not trying to not give you what you think you need
Right.
to run the township, but today's January 2nd, sometime in the next 5 or 6 days, anybody here who's a property owner is going to get a very giant property tax bill, and it's going to reflect the very large increase that was passed last year by one of the other jurisdictions that covers the citizens of this township. And I know mine's going up almost 20%. It's going from around 1995 a half year to 2472 a half year. And that is huge. And I understand that the residents here are going to see that property tax giant increase, those of us that have the bills mailed directly to us, and you better be ready for it. And I can't right now want to increase our census, and that's the only reason, Jeff. If we had oil wells going up and down Colerain Avenue, I'd say let's do it, but we don't. And I think people are really struggling right now, and I think they're in for a real wake-up call in about a week or two when you go out to your mailbox and you get that next tax bill, because it is going to be huge, and it's going to take people time to adjust that into their monthly budget, and it's a lot. And I want everyone out there to know that was not us. As I said earlier, you have done a great job of listening to us beat on you to keep expenses down, and tonight I even compared us to our neighboring township, who's spending a lot more than we are, and I would contend we're providing a better and higher quality of service. Look at the ratings of our police and fire, and how great a job you're doing with that. It's just that I think people are going to get some very shocking mail in the next few days, and those of you that have your property taxes built into your monthly mortgage, I would say check with your mortgager and make sure that they're escrowing the proper amount to cover that large increase that's coming, because I know of a case where somebody didn't do that, and they got about 12 months into the raised rates a few years ago, and suddenly the bank sent them a letter that it was that person over off of Royal Heights in Linus that had contacted me and said, "What is this?" And well, the rates had gone up, and they hadn't adjusted their. I said, "That's nothing with us. That's with the county auditor." But I get a lot of phone calls, so I would caution people when that bill comes that's due in January. Make sure you've adjusted your personal budget, make sure your mortgage payments adjusted correctly, because it's a big one. And that's the only reason, I believe we need something. That's why I'm trying to work out a deal with, that's why I'm asking you to, talk to Waycross or make it work a little harder.
No, that's fine. Yep, and just to be clear, it would not.
That's where I'm coming from.
Sure.
So,
It would not increase the appropriations over what you have already adopted in December. So it wouldn't increase appropriations or spending over what you've already, because it was built into that. So just information. My understanding is that you guys, there was a motion to table, right? Yeah, okay.
So
There was a motion to table. I think it was seconded.
Yeah,
was there
it
any other discussion?
Yeah, motion to table, we didn't second it. Okay,
I think there was, yep.
a motion to table this item.
Yep. It was moved, seconded, and
It's already moved and
discussed.
seconded, so right now, is there any other discussion?
Roll call.
No discussion from you. Was there any discussion from you, Mr. Waller?
No.
Okay. This is the motion to table.
Mr. Moshkapel?
Aye.
Mr. Runker?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board. That concludes the organizational items of the evening, and
Made it through it, Jeff. Congratulations.
that's great. We have two public hearings this evening, and I'll just remind the board and residents, public hearings are an opportunity to present information to the board on the topics that are listed. There was no sign-in sheet today, so what will happen is when it's your turn for a public hearing, our assistant law director will ask anyone who would like to give testimony to stand up and affirm that they will tell the truth. And then the board president will invite folks up to the lectern to present information. That would happen after our staff report. So the order of operations is Mr. Kohler will give a staff report, and then we'll do the swearing in, and then we'll have the public hearing. Typically, the public hearings do not have a 5-minute rule, for example, typically. So there's that. One other item that I wanted to share with you all is my recommendation for the first public hearing, which is on a lighting district on Capstan. My recommendation for that would be to open the public hearing and then continue the public hearing to February 11th. That allows us to check all of the procedural boxes that we satisfied all notice requirements and timelines that are required by ORC. So for the first public hearing, my recommendation is to open the public hearing by motion, and then by motion, continue the public hearing to February 11th.
That's what I'll do. I would like to, before we get started, I see a lot of people that maybe this is your first meeting that you've come to. If sometimes it seems like the trustees are in opposition to each other or questioning each other, it's because by law, we do not talk outside of meetings about township business. And sometimes, and I could tell, looking at Matt, that's the first time he heard my comments on your organizational items, and that's kind of how it works. So if it seems like, wow, you guys don't know what each other's thinking, it's because we don't. So with that, I will motion that we open up. And do you have the hearing number for the Capstan Lighting District?
That doesn't have a hearing number because it's not a zoning case. So this would just be a recommendation for a motion to open a public hearing on the Capstan Lighting District.
Have you motioned?
I will motion that we open a public hearing for the Capstan Lighting District.
I will second that motion.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
My recommendation is is that the board now make a motion to continue the public hearing to February 11th.
Okay, well, we need to vote to
Oh, yeah,
open.
right, sorry. Sorry, ahead of myself.
Fine.
So it's been a motion and a second to open the hearing for the Capstan Lighting District. Is there any discussion?
None.
Hearing none, Heather, please call a vote.
Mr. Marshall-Capel?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, board. Now the recommendation is to move to continue the hearing to February 11th.
I would move that we move the Capstan Lighting District hearing to February 11th, 2020.
I will second.
It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion? Mr. Mills, what time would that be on February 20th?
7 p.m.
February 11th?
7 p.m.
7 p.m. on February 11th,
right here at 4200 Springdale.
here at this location at 4200 Springdale. So,
You have a motion and a second.
motion to continue, and
No discussion. I have no discussion.
Mr. Marshall-Capel?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Very good. The next item on the agenda is a public hearing related to zoning case ZA2019-06, the zoning map amendment for a portion of parcel number 510-0013-0009, known as the Abbeytown Subdivision. And we'll begin this public hearing with a staff report from our senior planner, Mr. Marty Kohler, and I will try to pull up these presentations.
And then after his presentation, then we'll motion to open the public hearing for comments.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Marty Kohler, Senior Planner for Colerain Township. This comes to you as a request to rezone approximately 29.8 acres from R4, which is suburban medium residential, to R6, urban residential district, to PDR, which is a planned development residential district. The petitioner in this case is MI Homes. Brad Austin is their representative. This comes to you as a recommendation from our zoning commission. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to hold a public hearing and to get feedback regarding this proposal. No action is being requested of the trustees tonight. However, we would like to have action at your next meeting on the 14th. We would need some direction from the trustees as to how you would proceed with this. It does come as a denial recommendation from Zoning Commission. Staff recommended for approval of it, and we'll kind of see the reasons as we go through this. Next slide, please. The purpose of the planned development district is to allow for flexibility as opposed to what we get with what's called a standard subdivision. It's to achieve things like recreational facilities, open space, and other common facilities, and also helps preserve existing landscape and vegetation to the extent possible. It's to encourage sound planning principles in the arrangement of buildings, the preservation of open space, and utilization of topography and other site features. Next slide. Also, it's to obtain creative and coordinated designs in harmony with surrounding uses, allow procedures supplemental to those applicable in other districts or other use districts, to establish under which development plans are particularly designed to meet the objectives of this section, and also to allow for creative development that conforms with the goals and objectives set forth in the comprehensive plan. There are two ways of doing developments, subdivisions like this. One's called the development plan process, which we're in now. That starts with an application that's submitted to our zoning department. We send out notices, schedule a public hearing, and then zoning commission reviews that. They make a recommendation after holding a public hearing to the township trustees. Township trustees then takes action to either approve with conditions, or deny that application. If it's approved or approved with conditions, the developer proceeds with a final development plan that goes back to the zoning commission, and that puts all the details in place and also assures that any conditions that are set forth in the approval are included in that final development plan. Process continues after that. Under township rules or state of Ohio rules, the Hamilton County Planning Commission has the platting authority. So the actual subdivision of lots goes to the County Planning Commission. All of the improvement and construction drawings related to that subdivision goes to the county engineer, and so forth. So that's kind of the long process and where we fit into it. This particular property did have a standard subdivision plat approved about 15 years ago, and that went directly through Hamilton County Planning Commission. The township has the ability to comment on standard subdivisions, but we have no approval authority over those. Next slide. The subject property is on West Kemper Road. It's on the north side, just west of Pippin Road. The property we show Pleasant Run School. The reason why we highlight that, it's about a third of a mile walking by roads to this subdivision. We noted that Northwest School no longer provides transportation within a mile. So anyone living in this subdivision would not be eligible to have transportation. As a matter of fact, just west of this is another subdivision called Hunterston. It's developed back in the early 2000s by Dries, I believe. That falls within that mile circumference. So we're looking at ways of trying to get walkability in this particular neighborhood. Next slide. This is the actual land for the proposed subdivision. Currently, it's being used for agricultural purposes. Next slide. The zoning, as you can see, is combination R4 with a small portion being R6. It's surrounded mostly by R4, but R6 to the east. Next. This is the previous subdivision that was approved through the county called Slotinker Reserve. It was a standard subdivision, so all the lots met or exceeded the minimums for that zone classification. It included it's like 0.98 acre lot, that's shown as number 1, where the detention basin was. What we would point out with this particular subdivision, there was no provision for things like what is being proposed in the current subdivision, things like larger open space, street trees, architectural standards, buffering between the surrounding properties and this. Next slide. In the comprehensive plan, this shows up in the Beavis Pleasant Run character area as suburban neighborhood is the classification that it's colored in there. Next slide. Some of the things that pertain to it, most of the things in that Pleasant Run Beavis pertain to the Hamilton Avenue corridor, but the things that do pertain to residential says that the density of any new residential should reflect the development of similar uses within the character area, and suburban residential is listed as an appropriate land use. Next. This is a shot of the site from Kemper Road. You can kind of see it's rolling hillsides. There's some drainage swales that run through the property, but most of it's being used for agriculture. Next. This is looking west on Kemper Road, basically from in front of the firehouse, Colerain Firehouse, which is on Kemper Road. Next slide. And this is looking the opposite direction. This is from a vantage point of about where the proposed entry road from the subdivision would go in, and the property's on the left of that picture. And just, there's a couple photographs of the site, if you go through that, just to give you an idea of the character of the property. This is the development plan that's being proposed. It has about 8.5 acres of open space. You can see it has a street tree program throughout the subdivision. It has 68 lots. There's also a buffer along Kemper Road. However, that Kemper Road has a fairly steep hillside going down into the subdivision. Next slide. Just as a quick comparison to the Slonaker Reserve versus the proposed Abbeytown. By the way, that Slonaker Preserve, if they actually had the entire parcel, they could go back to the county and get duplicate approval for that because the zoning standards have not changed on that property. These are smaller lots. They're narrower lots. Probably the big difference is instead of 0.98 acres of open space, there's 8.75. There's no perimeter buffer with the Slonaker. There is where needed on the current proposal. The lots were 57 within the area of this particular development versus 68 being proposed. The lineal feet of streets is kind of noteworthy because it's one of the goals of a planned development is to try to do a more efficient design. There's about 270 feet less of streets with this proposal versus the previous, and that less streets means less maintenance and cost ongoing for the township. And then architectural standards, there was none with the previous. We are recommending architectural standards for this particular development. Next. And this is just a comparison of current zoning. The average lot size would be about 10,318 square feet. Lot widths are going to be narrower. Front setbacks are a little bit less. Side yards are less, and rear yards are the same as what the current zoning is. This is just the detailed plan that shows you where some of the buffer areas are in the street tree planning program. Next slide. It's a little more close up. As you can see where there's adjacent development, they propose some evergreen screening for that. Next slide. Again, on the west property boundary, they are proposing trees along that property line. Staff's recommendation is to also couple it with a fence along that property line for the extent to where those trees are. There was a concern expressed by the adjacent property owner that they have small kids, and there's a proposed retention pond right next door, and they wanted an actual fence separation between those properties. Next. There's a proposed monument sign at the entry. Next slide. This is the detail of what that would look like. And next slide. And again, the overall plan for the subdivision with the aerial photograph in the background. You can see where the natural drainage swales are. Those are the areas that are preserved in open space. Next slide. These are the review criteria that are outlined in the zoning code itself. The first is that the plan district and preliminary development plan are consistent with and the adopted Colerain Township Land Use Plan and Colerain Township Comprehensive Plan. The proposed development falls within the Beavis Pleasant Run character area that contains a land use guideline of the density of new residential should reflect the development of similar uses in the character area. And under the appropriate land uses, there's a statement of suburban residential, which is what's being proposed. Secondly, the proposed uses will have a beneficial effect on the community. The proposed development will provide for new single-family housing opportunities with open space amenities in an area that has not experienced recent new construction. The planned district will allow for about 270 lineal feet less of streets than the previous proposal. Next. The internal streets and primary and secondary roads are proposed properly interconnect with the surrounding existing road network. The design includes one stub street to the east, which may eventually connect with Pippin Road. Number 4, the site will be accessible from public roads that are generally adequate to carry traffic that will be imposed upon them by the proposed development, and streets and driveways on the site will be adequate to serve the residents or occupants of the proposed development. This development has direct access to West Kemper Road, which is a county highway of sufficient capacity to serve the development. The proposal has been forwarded to the county engineer for comment. As a standard condition with the platting process, a traffic impact study will be required to be submitted and approved by the county engineer for this development. Next. The minimum common open space areas have been designed and shall be duly transferred to a legally established homeowners association where applicable, or have been dedicated and accepted by Colerain Township or other public or quasi-public agency as provided in subsection 9.3.7. This particular proposal will have 8.47 acres of common open space exceeding the minimum of 20% requirement, which would be 5.78 acres. The open space is to be owned and maintained by a homeowners association. Number 6, the preliminary development plan is consistent with the intent and purpose of the resolution, and in particular in furtherance of the proposed purpose of the PD as set forth in section 9.3.1. It's that purpose section that I read at the very beginning of the presentation. The proposed development would not be permitted within the existing residential zone due to the density. The planned development is needed to provide for flexibility in lot sizes in exchange for the dedication of open space and to allow for additional enhancements such as buffering trees and architectural design. And then last, preliminary development plan has been transmitted to all other agencies and departments charged with responsibility and review. We submit this as we do all plans to the Hamilton County Planning Commission. Well, this particular one was not sent to them for review and approval. As you recall, last year we did a text amendment to our zoning regulation because Ohio law now no longer mandates that we send zoning map amendments to the County Planning Commission. We send it to the Hamilton County Stormwater and Infrastructure, Colerain Fire Department, Hamilton County GIS, Hamilton County Soil and Water Conservation, ODOT, Hamilton County Engineer, and the Metropolitan Sewer District. The staff recommendation to the Zoning Commission was for approval subject to conditions. Number 1 was that the front facades of all dwellings contain an element of stone, brick, or masonry unit. Number 2, the minimum housing size be 1,400 square feet for a 1-floor and 1,600 square feet for a 2-floor dwelling. All homes shall have a basement. That floor area would not be included in the floor area. That the 2 additional evergreens be provided within the vegetative buffer along the west property line. That was to provide some additional screening to the property owners to the west. The fencing be provided along the west property line of the development within the planted buffer area. Next. That a plan for the intent and treatment of the open space be included with the final development plan. Said plan shall address the manner in which the common open space will be developed or treated, which includes one or more of the following options: keeping it natural and maintained, provision of a playground, provision of paved walking trails, or provision of planting and landscaping. And number 7, that a homeowners association be formed to manage and care for the common open space, retention ponds, fencing, and vegetative buffers. Number 8, the maintenance of the vegetative buffers and open space on the preliminary plan shall be included and outlined in the homeowners association documents of Abbeytown. The maintenance shall be conducted in a manner that promotes and fosters the intent of the buffer to screen new development from the existing adjacent development. Number 9, the street name other than Newbridge be selected not to duplicate another street in Colerain. And number 10, a street lighting district be set up in this development in accordance with the standards of Colerain Township. 11, that public sidewalk be provided on West Kemper Road and throughout the development. I would comment on that. There's some feasibility issues about the terrain along West Kemper Road to accommodate a sidewalk. I think the intent with this condition is that a sidewalk connection be provided from east to west property line, whether that actually has to go through the subdivision, but the idea is that there be some sort of a pedestrian connection across the frontage of this property. Number 12, that the panhandle portion of the tract be transferred to an adjacent property owner. I don't know if you noticed in the initial map, there's a long panhandle that goes to the subdivision to the north that's only 30 feet wide. It's kind of a no-man's strip and not buildable. So the idea is that that would go away and not become a derelict piece of property. Number 13, that the front yard minimum setbacks be 25 feet for lots 1 through 13, and those are the lots that back onto Kemper Road. And the reason why they're asking for that reduction of front yard on those particular lots is because their backyards are going to be restricted by that hillside. That's number 13. And next. Zoning Commission actually didn't recommend for denial initially. At the public hearing meeting, there was a motion and second to approve the subdivision subject to staff recommendations. That motion failed to pass by a 4-to-1 vote. In that there was some kind of a little bit of ambiguity in that decision. Whenever a motion fails to pass, the question is, why did not pass? Was it because there was disagreement over maybe 1 or 2 staff conditions that could be ironed out, returned as an approval, or was there just an overall objection? And so we actually had to have a supplemental meeting of the Zoning Commission to discuss those matters. And you have the resolution from Zoning Commission, and the concerns were that the proposal would be detrimental to adjacent properties. The proposal would be a conflict with the current zoning and land use plan and comprehensive plan, including the density of homes and open space. The feasibility of the proposed sidewalk was in question, and the submitted preliminary development plan failed to satisfy Colerain zoning resolution 4.5.3 and weighing and contemplating the criteria. And that's the criteria I just read through in length. Next slide. So that is the recommendation that is before you tonight. We do have the developer here who would like to make a brief presentation regarding their development as well.
Yep, and I think that would happen after we open the public hearing.
That's correct.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, you can ask questions, yeah.
Well, looking at all the architectural designs, all the mapping, everything, what I see is not mentioning about the drainage, water thing going down the neighborhood, and they didn't have any plan. You got 2 Hamilton County agencies, no response to conservation, water, and soil thing, and why they didn't respond to it, and why this whole design you showed me not mentioning anything about the drain. That's the biggest concern. I went to that neighborhood. I saw that they showed me the pictures, how the water flooding that area, even without this subdivision going to be built. So you got no plan for that, for this?
Yeah, this plan indicates 2 stormwater retention ponds in that. Probably the reason why the county engineer has not responded yet is because the developer will eventually submit a detailed design and stormwater calculations for this. And the developer can probably speak in more detail. But they will need to provide all the calculations for how much stormwater is going into those basins and how that stormwater gets released back into the stream. And they are required to hold back all the stormwater and release only the amount of stormwater that would currently be coming off that property in its undeveloped state.
So I think one of the answers is the reason that stormwater is not discussed in this presentation is because our zoning does not deal with stormwater, and in fact, the township does not deal with stormwater.
But I'm worried about the people, the neighborhood.
Well, that's
Big concern.
that would be a problem with the state of Ohio in the way that they've delegated authority. So they've delegated jurisdiction on stormwater to Hamilton County and not to us. So the actual fight over stormwater isn't a fight for zoning; it's a fight for Hamilton County.
Yeah, both county engineer and soil and water conservation district are the approving authorities on that.
Yeah.
I will go ahead and motion that we open a public hearing for zoning case ZA2019-06, zoning map amendment for a portion of parcel number 510-0013-0009, otherwise known as Abbeytown Subdivision.
I will second that motion.
It's been motioned and seconded to open the public hearing. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Heather, please call a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
All right.
If anyone who wants to provide testimony, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And please state your name and address prior to speaking. Thank you.
And who would like to go first? Is that proper for the developer to go first? Have at it. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And please state your name.
I'm Brad Austin with MI Homes, Waterstone Boulevard, Cincinnati, Ohio.
Is that okay, Heather? Okay, great. Okay, please proceed.
So thanks for hearing us tonight. By the way, we do agree with staff's recommendation and conditions, so we're in agreement with them and the recommendation. Did want to run through kind of a slide deck to point out a few things. One, who we are as a company. There's also straight zoning, which is a PD4 versus what we proposed here, which is flexible design under the plan development, and what the differences are there and the benefits of the plan development plan. Address kind of the zoning commission's recommendation, and we found some faults with that, actually, some inaccuracies. And then finally, there's some neighbor concerns from the last meeting. We'd like to directly address those, including stormwater. So, next slide, please. Who are MI Homes? We were founded in 1976 in Columbus by the Schottenstein family. Bobby Schottenstein is currently the president and CEO of the company. We are publicly traded on New York Stock Exchange. We are in 15 markets, 15 major metropolitan markets. We built, I think, almost, our gross revenue in 2018 was $2.3 billion. And then our Cincinnati division, we built 334 homes in 2018. And we won Builder of the Year for several years running. So we have over 40 years of experience. Go ahead to the next slide. Built over 120,000 homes. And what that means to the customer is we can really back up significant warranty. In fact, the best in the industry. 1-year customer care coverage, 10-year construction defects coverage. This is unheard of, a 15-year transferable structural warranty. If you buy a house from us and want to sell it 5 years later, your buyer gets that benefit of that next 10 years. So it's great for our customers. We stand behind our product, build a quality house. And of course, the manufacturer's warranties are extended. Next slide. There's talk about development oversight. We're asking you for zoning approval, but as Marty mentioned, there's a lot of other agencies involved that they distribute to make sure things are done right and we do things right. Of course, we intend to. County engineer and public works for stormwater and road design and access to Kemper Road. We're required to do a traffic study part of this, so they'll be weighing in on that as well. Metropolitan Sewer District for the sewer, EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers both review our stormwater drawings again, so there's another checks and balance on stormwater at that level, at the state and federal level. Duke Energy for all the utilities, and of course Hamilton County Building Inspections will inspect all our homes and approve them for a final CO. This is a look at where we are in the marketplace. About 20 active communities right now. We would love to, mostly in central North Cincinnati and up to southeast Dayton. And we'd love to be able to put a star on there for Abbeytown this year with your approval. Next slide. Marty showed the plan. Again, a PD versus a straight zoning plan. Offers a lot of natural vegetation to remain, kind of helps the benefits, especially to the property owners there to the west. Allows for creative design following the topography of the land. Again, added benefits, street tree programs, architectural controls. So working with staff, they said this is really the appropriate zoning path for this project, and that's how we come up with this. Next slide. This is the same design, just shows it in hardline drawings. The white area being the actual home lots themselves, and you can see the green area being all the open space. So that basically followed the properties R4 and R6. We followed the R6 lot standards, which you'll see there, but under a PUD, we followed the open space standard, which is 20%. We're actually at 29% open space, so we've exceeded the minimum requirements. And again, you'll see just by looking at the topo, we're following the natural features of the site and preserving them. A lot of people, including Mr. Flam, and I think Mr. Pitcher, I believe, I won't speak for them, but there was comments that they would support. They were okay with MI homes and okay with straight zoning, but they questioned going through the PD route and why that was necessary. And so after the last hearing, we went ahead and created a straight zoning plan, what that would look like on this site. Next slide, please. So this is what straight zoning would look like on the site. And if you see the very first statistic, it will be 68 lots on a straight zoning, and we're proposing 68 lots on the PUD zoning. So exact same density, exact same number of lots. The difference being we've totally destroyed the site under this plan. So every tree will be gone, every valley will be filled, mass earthwork, the entire site. And so it's just not smart planning. I mean, you have a township administrator, a certified planner, you have planning staff, and I think that's why they directed and why your code allows us to go plan development, because it's a smarter use, more sensitive use of the site. And also, and we'll show you in a minute, I think there are some real benefits to the adjacent neighbors as well. Again, some stats there. Under this plan, same number of lots, smaller lots, we trade off for the open space of 8.4, almost 8.5 acres. Another interesting thing is here we'll have 39 lots sharing common property lines with the adjacent neighbors. Under the PUD plan, there's only 20 properties, lots on this plan sharing with the adjacent neighbors. So really backing houses up against the neighbors at almost all edges of the site. And also you have no buffer along Kemper Road either. Next plan. And let me point out one last thing. And the detention essentially is going to be located in the same place. You have to detain water under either straight zoning or a PUD plan, and that's the low point in the site, and that's the natural place for it to go. Additionally, you'll see the sewer comes off right there too, because again, that's the natural low point in the site. Next slide, please. And we kind of want to take a look and see, all the adjacent neighbors and how this is a straight zone plan. You'll see rack and stack lots up against all adjacent property lines. And we want to point out the first 5 there. So if you go lower left-hand corner, starting with Gloria Ayer, then Michael Flam, who's here tonight, will speak, Paul Ayer, Kevin Girth, and Donald Smith. All those people under the straight zoning, see the numbers on the side, all those had 4, 4, 3, 3 homes butting up to them, sharing a common property line. You go to the other side, under the PUD plan, Gloria Ayer had not 4, but she only had 1 house backing up to her. Then Flam, Ayer, Girth, and Smith had 0 under our PUD plan. So it's very sensitive to those neighbors to the west and slightly to the north. The other thing I'll point out is the distances under this to the setback lines of on this plan. So in all cases, the homes are going to be closer to the homes under straight zoning versus a PUD plan, which allows buffering from the new houses to the existing houses. And then if you go around, you'll see Jeffrey Smith, he's 400 feet, over 400 feet to the property line, and Kenneth Pitcher is, 385 feet. So they're over a football field away, and they also all have their own existing woods and natural cover. So again, that's a long distance, and I think the impact is debatable. Depends if your opinion, but we think that it's being pretty sensitive to neighbors by going with the PDD plan. Let's go to the next slide. So anyway, to summarize the benefits in a straight zoning or PUD plan. Straight zoning being on the left, PUD check marks on the right. Same number of homes, 68 homes under either scenario. The density is the same at 2.3 dwelling units to the acre. We are consistent, both plans could be consistent with the comprehensive plan, both are consistent with land use plan, both are consistent with the zoning ordinance. The problem under the straight zoning is there's no planning input by Colerain Township if we went that way, which Marty mentioned. We've got 8 acres of open space, 29% on the PUD plan. It's much more sensitive to the natural topography and the drainage, protects the trees and natural vegetation. They share 20 property lines with existing neighbors instead of 39. We supplemented trees, fencing along the buffering, the west side and the east side along the church. We've added buffering there as well. We have the architectural controls. We also have a street tree program, and we have over 200 feet less of street for you guys to maintain ultimately. Next slide. So again, Marty kind of ran through these, kind of the purpose of why go plan development, and so we want to touch on those 5 criteria, why we did it. It allows for the flexibility of the zoning requirement, where the result will be a higher quality development. I think that if you look at this plan for the straight zoning, I would say most people would find it to be a higher quality development. Next slide. Again, preserving existing landscape to the greatest extent possible. Well, clearly this plan is better than a straight zoning plan in terms of meeting that requirement or guidance. Next plan. Encourage sound planning principles. Again, you have certified planners on planning staff and administrator. They've concluded and made a recommendation that this is based on sound planning principles. And again, preservation, go back one. Preservation of the open space and utilization of topography, which this plan does, versus mass grading out the site and totally clearing the site. Next slide. Harmony with the surrounding uses, we'll touch on that a little bit. I think we touched on why we designed it this way. We're trying to be as sensitive as we can to the adjacent neighbors. And a development plan particularly designed to meet the objectives of this section, which I think it is. These are the criteria in this plan has been found by staff and us to meet that criteria. Next slide, please. And it's a creative development, and it is consistent with the Colerain Township Comprehensive Plan, and then it's resident single family. Next slide. I want to touch a little bit on the resale market and how we fit in with the surroundings. We project a starting price around $290,000 as a base price, and we think we'll average someplace between $325,000 and $350,000. We don't know. The customers will decide what they want to spend, put in their houses. But if you go to the immediate west, the resale market in the last 24 months, the average there was $272,000, so we're above that. To the north, $179,000. To the east, $115,000. And down there to the southwest, $174,000. Now we know that we've got some big lots around us, but the character area really is the overall area. And for the market is more than just the adjacent homes. It would be that whole market here. And in some cases, we're almost twice the value of the average resale over the last 24 months. Next slide, please. We have plans. We have 10 different floor plans we're going to start with here. It offers 40 different elevations. Each house has 4 different elevations. Again, there's your average starting price of $290,000. We think we'll average $325,000 and above. Some people ask, well, how can that be? Well, we modeled this off another community we have in Mason that we started last year called Carrisdale. And again, the lot size there is the same, 60-foot lots. Actually, we're 65-foot lots here wide. Starting price there was $290,000, and it's actually averaging $363,000. Next slide. And again, people doubted our numbers, but these are actual sales, actual closings, and these are all a public record and recorded with the Warren County Auditor's Office. So if anyone wants to question our math or where we came up with our conclusions, The same homes are being built here, and that's where we're basing our estimates on. Next slide, please. Wanted to touch on the zoning commission's objections, and Marty kind of touched on this before. We're really struggling with the accuracy of these. Let me read it to you. Abbeytown Subdivision would be detrimental to the adjacent properties. Well, I think I've just kind of walked through how we're not trying to be detrimental to the adjacent properties. Average house price is higher. We're trying to provide buffering. And so I think we're trying to address some of the stormwater concerns, which we'll touch on in a minute. And then they went on to say it's in conflict with the current zoning, land use plan, the comprehensive plan, including the density of the homes and open spaces, feasibility of the proposed sidewalk, and the submitted preliminary development plan failed to satisfy Colerain zoning resolution section 4.5.3 and weighing and contemplating the criteria set forth therein. We go on water. Next slide, please. So again, conflict, like I said, we're in conflict with the current zoning. Our proposed plan seeks smaller lots in exchange for 29% open space. That is the PD guidance. But again, we're currently zoned R4 and R6. We use the R6, which is the current zoning part of the property, but then we went the PD route to get the open space and be sensitive to the neighbors and also the existing land. Next slide. Again, then they stated conflict with the current land use plan. Well, the current land use plan, if you'll see in yellow with our little star there, designate this as resident single family. So we are in compliance with the land use plan. Next slide, please. Land use framework, this designates this on the land use plan as suburban neighborhood. Next slide, which Marty mentioned. One in there, the guidance is, one is cul-de-sacs. Well, it talks about connectivity. We are connecting to the only other public road adjacent to our site, which is Kemper Road. Additionally, we're stubbing to the only property that doesn't currently have single family on it, which is a church property, which was sold, and that could be developed, and our road eventually could go to Pippin, but we don't own that property, the church owns it. But all the other surrounding properties are single-family homes. So we've connected where we can, and then it goes on to say, well, used cul-de-sacs should be minimized in new developments unless they're necessary because of steep topography and other constraints. I think that's the situation here. We've got rolling terrain, and we have no place else to connect. We've connected to the only two places we can, so hence the rest of the number of cul-de-sacs. Goes on to say development within suburban neighborhoods should include sidewalks. Well, we have sidewalks on both sides of the street, and as staff said, we're trying to work on a solution for a full connection east-west, whether that's on Kemper or within the development. Responsive to the natural characteristics of the area, including hillsides and vegetation. Again, this plan avoids a lot of the natural vegetation and works with the topography, preserving the natural vegetation. Goes on to say density of the new development should be compatible with the densities of existing developments surrounding the area. We'll touch on that in a minute. Goes on to say flexibility depending on the location of the development. And then density of the new residential area should reflect development of similar uses within the character area. Let's go to the next slide. So we looked at density, right? And so the density to the left of us or to the west of us is 1.9 dwellings to the acre. However, it only has 14% open space versus our 29% open space. So we are at 2.3 units to the acre at 29% open space. You go up to Spruce Way, their density is actually 3.8 dwelling units to the acre with no green space. You go to the east, and they have 4.48 dwelling units to the acre with no open space. And you go down low there, and it's 2.7 with no open space. Again, we're at 2.3 with 29, almost a third of the site being open space. So we think it is in keeping with the character and the density of the surrounding area. Next slide, please. A lot of talk about the sidewalk. One of their objections was conflict with the current comprehensive plan, including feasibility of the proposed sidewalks. We provide a cut there on the lower left-hand side. You'll see that hillside and the back of those homes backing up to Kemper Road. First thing you'll notice is that they're all basically below the road, which is good from a buffering standpoint. We also have left natural vegetation buffering at the top of the hill, which should help, from people passing by. But you'll see at the very top of that hill, that's the edge of the Kemper Road. And so literally the sidewalk is hanging out in midair at this point. So we agree that it's tough. It's It's a tough engineering challenge, but we're committed to working with staff and trying to find a solution, as well as the county engineer will weigh in, because it's a county engineer's road. And there are certain setbacks he will require, and whether or not we can meet those and physically construct it, that's something we're working with staff on. One of the things I'll point out is you do have a sidewalk waiver program, and a condition of approval could be that we work with staff and the county engineer for a sidewalk solution on Kemper Road or through the site itself for a continuous east-west connection. But if that can't be worked out and staff finds it to be unfeasible, we can write a check to the waiver fund for $75,750 based on our frontage along Kemper Road. So you could approve and have a backup plan if we can't accomplish the task. So I offer that. Next slide, please. Again, Marty, I think, kind of went through these. These are the approval criteria for plan unit development. Let me see if I can sum. The PD district and preliminary development plan are consistent with adopted Colerain Township land use plan and Colerain Township comprehensive plan. Our response to this, as previously discussed, the proposal is for single-family development with a density less than most of the character of the surrounding area and preserves natural open space. Next, the proposed uses will have a beneficial effect. Go ahead. That's a beneficial effect on the community. New development is high quality housing with a higher average price point than our surrounding neighbors. So we think that is benefit. The internal streets and primary and secondary roads that are proposed properly interconnect with the surrounding existing road network. I've touched on that there's only one road to connect to, and there's only one property to stub to. So we meet that criteria. Next, please. Site will be accessible to public roads. Again, Kemper Road is a minor arterial road, and it's generally adequate to carry the additional 68 homes. Also, as we mentioned, Hamilton County Engineer is going to require a traffic study. It is his road and his jurisdiction, and we'll have to comply with whatever improvements he deems necessary. Next is regarding open space. Again, we exceeded that by 32%. The minimum open space was 5.78 acres versus 8.5, 32% increase. And yes, we will dedicate that open space for maintenance to an HOA. 6, that the development plan is consistent with the intent and purpose of the resolution, and in particular the furtherance of the purpose of the PD district, which this is as set forth in sections 9.3.1. As previously discussed, the proposal provides a higher quality and creative development, preserves the existing landscape and open space, and is in harmony with the surroundings. And finally, that the preliminary development plan has been transmitted to all other agencies and departments in charge of the responsibility of review, and per staff's plan or report, that was done back in November. Next slide, please. We do want to touch on stormwater. So these are two pictures from Mr. Flam's presentation last time. So we've put them in here not to ignore them, but to try to address them. And I commissioned our civil engineer to go out there and assess the situation and see if there's any way we can help alleviate the situation, but at a minimum, not make it any worse. So I have Scott here with Abercrombie, if you want to come up, Scott. And he'll walk you through kind of what's going on in the stormwater situation, how we basically deal with it and don't affect it.
Good evening. My name is Scott Huber. I'm the site civil engineer working for the developer. As you can see on the slides there, those were two flooding pictures that were submitted by the residents during the zoning commission meeting. And you can see the text in there that the statement made by the homeowner is that that's the situation, with as little as 2-inch rainfall. So you can see both the flooding issues out looking out his front door. Those are looking to the west. If you can go to the next slide, please. So I did an on-site visit, looked at the situation, and what I found was that there are two culverts that are underneath the existing private drives. There's two private drives that run from Kemper Road to the north to some existing residences. And the first one that's immediately downstream from us is a 12-inch diameter pipe, and it drains 53 acres. The second culvert, which is downstream from the 12-inch pipe, is an 18-inch pipe, and it drains a total of 57 acres. So I did a drainage analysis on it, and I determined that both of those culverts are severely undersized. And just for reference, the first culvert that is really a 12-inch in the field, that really should be sized as a 36-inch to have it function properly. The second culvert in the field is an 18-inch. The proper size for that should probably be a 42-inch size pipe. So both of those culverts are undersized right now today in the field. That's what's causing the flooding problems. I reached out to the Hamilton County Public Works Stormwater Division. They control the stormwater regulations in the county. They didn't have any calculations for either of those culverts. So, you know, how they got put in, how they got sized, they don't know, I don't know, but that's what's in the ground out there. If you go to the next slide, as was mentioned by Marty and Brad, the stormwater detention is required for this development, both for stormwater quality and for stormwater quantity. Ohio EPA has jurisdiction for stormwater quality requirements, and the Hamilton County Stormwater Division has jurisdiction for the stormwater quantity, which is also the detention requirements. I think as Marty mentioned, or as maybe as Mr. Mills mentioned, there is no chapter in the zoning resolution that deals with stormwater. It's not, you know, under the township regulation. Next slide, please. So I looked at the detention analysis, assuming our site was going to go in, we'd have to do detention. If we put those ponds in there, what does that do to the downstream properties? So that first bullet point there, it says that if we installed the detention system per the requirements, per the OEPA and per the Stormwater Division requirements, we're going to see a reduction of peak runoff is going to be reduced by 25%. Unfortunately, due to that large flat area that's down there, even though there's a reduction in the peak flow, you're only going to reduce the water level by a half an inch. So in reality, the owners aren't going to notice that, right? I mean, it's a half an inch less during some 2-inch storm. They're really not going to see any different. But keep in mind that it is even though it is a reduction in the peak flow value, there's not going to be a noticeable difference in the flooding. Next slide. So one of the things we look at is, you know, people often say, well, why don't you over detain? Why don't you do more than the regulations and try to help out the downstream condition? So I did it to the extreme. I did another model to the extreme. I said, let's totally eliminate the Abbeytown Subdivision watershed. Let's completely take it out of the equation, pretend it never existed. It's not even a part of the watershed, right? That's not a feasible solution, but for modeling purposes, I'm able to do that. So I reran the model, totally dropping out and eliminating the Abbeytown watershed. The peak flow was reduced by 27%. So with the development, with the detention, I was able to reduce it 25%. If we were to somehow magically eliminate all of the runoff, they would only see an increase to 27%. So a very small increase just by eliminating the watershed. If you did that, you're still not going to reduce the water level by a significant amount. It actually doesn't even, it's not even measurable. It's still a half-inch reduction. So even though we dropped out the watershed, the downstream property owners, they're not going to notice any difference in their flooding situation. So what this situation proves, or what this scenario proves, is that the detention system is going to be effective. It's the problems that are going on out there are not from our 20 acres that's going into the system. It's from other off-site water that's coming in through there, and it's due to the undersized culverts. So in conclusion, if we do detention, or when we do detention, we're definitely not going to worsen the downstream condition, but we're not going to make it better either, unfortunately. So what's the next slide, please? And I'll turn that back over to Brad.
Thank you, Scott. Again, we do want to be sensitive to the adjacent neighbors. The Flams in particular are immediately adjacent to the site, and the detention will drain to the creek that borders their property, Minister Ayers' property to the north. and as well as there's a sewer easement that goes to the edge of his, that's been granted through the Flam property to serve the project as well. I point out that you look who signed and granted the easement for the sewer, and it in fact is the Flams. So they facilitated, way back in 2006, I guess, facilitated for this property to be able to be developed by granting a sewer easement and by which we can extend the sewer to the property. So they were cognizant and actually participated in the potential development, feasibility of the development. So this isn't news that this property could be developed, I guess is what I'm pointing out. Next slide. We did want to educate you all and the Flams when we drew the straight zoning plan and what difference would make on the Flams versus the PD plan. If you look at the PD plan, right now they share no common property line with any of our lots. They basically, we put in the buffer you'll see there and the fence to help them out. Additionally, they're really looking over retention ponds and open space. And in that scenario, they're lot 67, they're 230 feet away from the setback line, another 167 feet away. So I think this is a much better plan for the Flams. If you look to the right, under straight zoning plan, they're going to be closer to the nearest house, and they're going to have 4 properties or 4 houses backing up to them. So they'll be staring at the backs of houses versus being able to stare at open space. I know personally what plan I would want. I mean, I can't speak for the Flams, but I think the PD design really helps them from a buffering standpoint. Next slide. I'm going to kind of wrap up. We kind of talked through most of these things, but these are the list of zoning commission's reasons for denial. And detrimental to adjacent properties, I think we talked about it. We're going to have a nice price point home, higher than the surrounding ones. Open space and buffering under the PD plan versus straight zoning. We'll have additional trees and fencing and buffering to the west and to the northeast. Conflicts with the zoning ordinance. Well, from a density standpoint, there's 68 lots, whether we go straight zoning or the PD plan. The R6, the zoning ordinance is R6 zoning standard. We've used that standard for lots in exchange for providing 8.5 acres of open space. Again, they mentioned it conflicts with the land use plan. Well, we've shown it is in compliance with the land use plan. Conflicts with the comprehensive plan. Well, we pointed out that we do include sidewalks, and the cul-de-sacs are being used for due to the topography, and we can't connect to any place else. We've connected all the possible scenarios. The conflicts with the comprehensive plan, again, we think it calls for us to be responsive to the natural hillside and vegetation, which our plan does versus straight zoning. And density is compatible with the existing developments, which we're actually significantly lower than the developments that surround us in most cases, or certainly in terms of most of the homes. Density, again, we're at 68 lots, same as straight zoning, just a better plan. And again, we've got this 8.5 acres of open space. They mentioned feasibility of Kemper Road sidewalk. We know it's a challenge. Staff knows it's a challenge. We're committed to doing it. As a backup plan, we are agreeing to go the waiver route as a condition of your approval and write a check for $75,750 if it deems not feasible. East-west connection. Mentioned that, and then it goes on to say the last one, Colerain zoning resolution 4.3 or 4.5.3. The 7 criteria that Marty ran through, we ran through too. I think we are in compliance with those, and our plan does address those criteria of approval. So I think in short, what we see is it's really a choice. Is the PD plan as submitted a better plan for the adjacent neighbors, better plan for the project, better plan for the township, versus going a straight zoning route? And we would appreciate your support of what we think is a better plan than the PD plan as submitted. Thank you, and I'll answer any questions.
Adam, I have got a purely legal question, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to ask it. So here goes. If we're not supposed to consider the stormwater component of it, and that's a county issue and not a township issue, what a great presentation. You've really done your homework, sir. Should we consider that part of his presentation?
No,
If we're not allowed to consider that?
given the history at the zoning commission hearing, that was a topic That was a topic that was of major import, and a lot of testimony was given to that, and I think that's why they've addressed it to this point. That being said, it is outside the consideration, really, of the township, as has been
Okay,
stated.
because there's the other factors of the price of the houses and stuff. I didn't know when this will be a big decision when we make it. I didn't know if we were allowed to consider that as part of the, it'd be just like in a courtroom where you say that can't be part of the testimony, this can. And I don't expect you to know this answer right now, so.
Well, if this is appealed, they look at is there substantial evidence to support the 7 elements that Marty talked about exclusively, or in depth. And does the stormwater go to any of those? No, is what,
Okay, well, I don't want to screw this up, so that's why I'm asking the question.
No, that's
Thanks.
it, yeah.
I had a quick question. Is there a price point difference between something that's straight zone versus the PUD?
Price point difference being, well,
What the homes will sell for based upon, I mean, there seems to be a number of upgrades. You're talking about maybe stone on the facade on the PUD version, although they're different size lots, so.
right, so a lot of elements. So under the PD plan, we're actually moving the cost of the project up in some ways. I mean, we're adding street trees, we're adding architectural standards, adding entry monuments. So yes, it does tend to push the cost of the development up.
But the end price, I guess, the sales price,
It would push it up, yes.
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
the cost has to be passed along in theory.
right, okay.
You mentioned the Carysdale development being similar to this. Is that something I could go look at, or should I stay away from that?
You should make your decision based on.
Okay, but he brought that up, that's why I was asking, so I will not go up there and compare this to the Carysdale development. 'Cause I want to make sure I'm only utilizing what I'm allowed to utilize. Great, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please state your name and address for Heather, for the record.
Mike Flam, reside at 3120 West Kemper Road. I'll provide you with some photos that Mr. Austin provided also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you turn that screen back on? As I stand here and I listen to this presentation by Mr. Austin, Mr. Huber, great presentation, no doubt. They've done their homework, they've worked on this, and they did exactly what they said they were going to do. At the zoning board meeting, they said if we don't approve it, they're going to go to straight zoning and they're going to shove down a neighborhood down our throat. They exactly did that. Brought up some good points. He is a certified planner. By changing it and doing what he wants, that's sound planning. The contrast, though, is to go to straight planning. That would not be sound planning. He goes down the list here. What's going to be provided if you allow the zoning change? And then what he's going to do to us if we don't. Mr. Mills, you said you're a certified planner also. I would be outraged if you would approve a subdivision that was not quality in Colerain Township. Trustees, you should be outraged that they're threatening if we don't give them what they want, they're going to take that subdivision and force it upon us. Same number of houses. That really shows MI's true color. If we don't get what we want, we'll build a bad subdivision. If we don't get what we want, you won't get your green space. Let me reassure you, the green space they provide in their rezoned product, it's drainage, it's unusable, and if you look at the top of the property, it was listed as Zone A and B, I believe, or Track A and Track B, it's extremely hilly. Please don't get the vision of children out there playing. It's unusable land. For them to come in and do this presentation as to what's best for me and my family. Mr. Austin, are you a resident of Colerain Township? Not even a resident, but he knows what's best for us. This is outrageous that they hold us like this. Here's Plan 1. Look how beautiful it is. Green space. By the way, your $75,000, you're going to get that check. There's no sidewalk going in. There's no sidewalk going in. The green space that they show on their map, it's all beautiful, it's green. Look at the topographical map. It's a hillside. It's not where children are going to be playing. But on their current drawing, the straight plan, they're putting houses in there. We're running houses up the side of a hill that's a huge slope. The fact that they come in and they're going to tell us this is what's best. Now, I got to say, I do appreciate Mr. Huber's honesty. At the zoning meeting, he came in and he talked about the water problem. He made a few comments that I really, really paid attention to. And he agreed with them again tonight. Mr. Mills said it himself. The township doesn't deal with water problems. Apparently, no one deals with my water problem. If Mr. Huber came down to my property when it was flooding, he would see that the flood isn't on my property where the 12-inch pipe is, because that's true. He wouldn't see the flood is just in between the driveways where the 18-inch pipe is. That's also true. But if you go back to the picture, and it is on page 4 of what I provided you, on the right, that's on my driveway. If you happen to look on the picture of page 4, what you see there is on 2 and 3. On page 4, that's looking to the west. That's on the other side of those 12 and 18-inch pipes. That's just as flooded. And by the way, I was out there with Hamilton County Soil and Conservation. That is an open culvert all the way down to the pipes. The water drainage pipes are clear. They went in and they looked. They went in and they looked. It's an open drainage pipe. This is not something where the water can only flow so fast through. You don't have to be an engineer to understand water runs downhill. The water on page 4 is in an open air culvert, and still it's flooding. Mr. Huber, once again, I appreciate your honesty. It's private property is what he said last time. There's nothing we can do about it. He admits that there's flooding. He sat here and told you there's nothing we're going to do about it, and the subdivision isn't going to change a thing. That's also assuming that he's correct. That's assuming that he's correct. Now, we know he submitted plans for the zoning commission meeting. When he was questioned about the changes that were made on them, his answer was, don't have to take my word for it. These are meetings of record. Get the transcripts. His exact answer was, I was sloppy. I got to pin my hopes and dreams on sloppy. I got to pin my hopes and dreams on his calculations being correct, that I'm not going to see any change. Then I got to pin my hopes and dreams on Mr. Austin showing you how bad it's going to be if we don't give him what he wants. This is outrageous. When we talk about traffic safety, the quote just was, it is a minor arterial road, Kemper Road. It is indeed 2 lanes, but that's 50 miles an hour. And we're going to pin the hopes and dreams on your $75,000 sidewalk check that kids, because they're not going to get busing, they're within a mile of the school. The kids will find another way besides Kemper Road. How many dead children do we have to deal with? Because they want to put a street in right there. Why did they put it up the hill by the firehouse? Why did they put it all the way at the bottom of the hill? If you're familiar with the area, I went out and I took the measurements for us. As you travel westbound on West Kemper Road, there's a slight rise and it peaks west of the firehouse. The distance you have to travel from when you can first see where the subdivision driveway is going to go in is 630 feet. Now let me explain who I am. I am a crash reconstructionist. I'm internationally accredited through ACTAR. I've been a crash reconstructionist. I've been testifying as expert witness in traffic safety, vehicle crashes, and causation factors for 20 years. I testify in Hamilton County between the civil courts and the criminal courts. I understand traffic safety. At 50 miles an hour, a car is traveling 73.3 feet per second. As you come over that rise, the street is 630 feet away. The math is done for you in your paperwork. You have 8.59 seconds to make a decision and get the car to a stop. Under ideal conditions, your car needs 221 feet to stop. That leaves you 5.5 seconds to see a problem, make a decision, and respond to it, and get your car sliding to a stop. Now, there's some assumptions here, though. One is that you're paying attention. 2, it's not raining, it's not snowing, there's no ice on the road. And 3 is you're not speeding. Any factor drops the time down and raises the distance up. That intersection is going to cause crashes. It's going to cause problems. Mr. Austin wants to come in here and do a very wonderful presentation, and it is. However, there's hosts of reasons why this neighborhood isn't appropriate. I'm not against houses. He is absolutely correct. I signed that paperwork, and I believe it was in 2006 I signed it for the easement. I'm not against houses going in there. The density, the way they're trying to shove it down our throat, MI isn't being a good neighbor. They're not doing me any favors. In fact, we planned on a subdivision going in from the start. We planned for something to be in there. I didn't plan on Mr. Austin coming in with MI Homes, who's supposed to be a good builder. I've lost all respect for MI Homes. And try to strong arm their way in to get what they want, putting the street in where they want it to go, put the density of the houses in. They come in, they strong arm their way in. We'll get what we want, or look what we're going to do. Look at the subdivision we're going to put in if you don't give us what we want. By his own statement, the change in zoning, that's good planning. Well, deductive reasoning tells you the straight planning is not good plans. What he designed is not good plans. And if that's the name MI Home builds, then I understand we'll have to take the fight to Hamilton County as well. This is outrageous. They come in here and they try to strong arm their way into Colerain Township and tell each one of us, and they're not even residents, as to what's appropriate. I'm not against a subdivision going in. I'm not against MI Homes building a subdivision. If they want to work with the neighbors, they can work with the neighbors. If you look at their concessions that they made to us, 2 trees and a fence. That's a concession? 2 trees? You're a $2.3 billion business, and you can give us 2 trees and a fence. Thank you. I can build it myself. Plan a good community. My next question is, if Mr. Huber's wrong on the water, what other communities he built in Colerain Township that's having problems? Because as he said, Hamilton County has to sign off on this. Hamilton County signs off on it, and they're wrong. Guess who owns the problem? All of us do. And in the meantime, I've got no place to live. This is outrageous that they would come in here and do such a presentation. Give us what we want, or else. There are hosts of reasons. And by the way, I keep hearing the term rolling hills used for that property. Those are some beautiful pictures that you put up there. A little bit slanted. There's a 100-foot drop in elevation from the top to the bottom. That's not rolling hills. Those are steep drops. So even your own zoning board, and I'm not sure why, your own zoning board said, hey, listen, we'll go with this. Unbelievable. 100-foot drop in elevation. There's a 25-foot drop in elevation over a 25-foot period. His elevation plans that he put up on the board, they're perfect, right on. If they build that wall out to put the sidewalk in to match the Hunterston subdivision, it's got to be 21 feet off the road. They build the wall out, they're infringing on the property to the back. So the 7,800-foot property isn't 7,800 feet anymore. In fact, I believe the words last meeting, Mr. Kohler said it. We're going to hope for creative engineering. Last time there was a hope for creative engineering, what I remember is New Orleans 2005 with Katrina. This is the best we got for Colerain, is creative engineering, a hope for it? Come on. Now, Mr. Kohler did change the statement. He said there is a fairly steep drop-off off of Kemper Road. Once again, a 25-foot drop, it's a 50% grade over 25 feet, isn't a fairly steep drop-off. Substantially steep. There's a reason there's a guardrail on the top of the hill to keep cars from going off of it. I'm not against this neighborhood going in. I am against MI Homes being strong-armed about it, pushing us around, saying, give us what us want, or we're going to build this subdivision by his own standards, doesn't meet sound planning principles. I'm asking you to not delay this vote. There's no reason for this vote to go any further. I'm asking you to deny their application. I'm asking you to follow the zoning board's recommendation. Thank you.
The next speaker, please. Please state your name and address, sir.
My name's Don Smith. I'm at 12080 Birch Hill. Could you put the slide up with the panhandle? Just wanted to show them where I am. Yeah, the frying pan. There's a frying pan in there somewhere. Oh, okay, it could have been. All right, sure.
I also had just a quick handout. I did some math this afternoon. I just thought you'd enjoy that. I'll walk you through this. Very simple.
Do you need a copy of it also? No. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. My background, I have an advanced degree in weapon systems engineering. The major in that is physics, plasma physics. So I'm very adept at physical systems, interactions of multiple different facets of it between thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, fluid dynamics, just mechanical engineering. I've worked in mechanical engineering spaces quite a bit. So I'm fairly adept at understanding some of the technical nuances of what's going on here. So what I wanted to do was follow up on what Mr. Flam talked about. The paper that I handed you is titled Abbeytown Water Retention Estimate for 30-acre MI Home Site. And the question that I posed last time when at the Zoning Planning Commission, I had asked the question about what do you do with a non-normal event? Having lived in Houston many years, when a slow-moving hurricane or a tropical storm or even a Hurricane Cat 1 comes up and sits over territory for an extended period of time, it becomes a water pump. And it just sucks up the water from the warm Gulf of Mexico, and it just drops and drops and drops, where you get 3, 4, 5 feet of water dropping down. That's, for a hurricane that goes fast, you deal with the wind, you deal with the water. But when you get a slow-moving storm, it's more difficult to deal with because then you're just sitting there squeezing the sponge and the water comes down. What I've seen up here, and if you look at page 2, I just pulled up some hydrometeorological design studies from NOAA, and it just talks about some very maximum rainfalls. There's one in eastern Ohio that was, in 30 minutes, they got 7 inches. St. Louis, they've got 12 inches in less than an hour. It's to validate the data that I would estimate, if you just took a nominal slice at this, 6-inch event, 6 inches of rain in an afternoon from the leftover of a remnant of a hurricane. You get a big cold front or big low pressure coming through that starts to pull all that moisture up out of the Gulf, and it stalls and sits over us. You have this once every 3, 4 year, 5 year event where you're going to end up with a ton of water coming down and sitting on top of this place. So with that said, let me go to my first page here. The question was, how much runoff water is collected if a half a foot of rain falls in an afternoon? Again, the assumptions I made were ground is saturated for some previous rainfall, so all the rain is runoff. Makes the calculation a little bit easier. Historically, the Ohio Valley has experienced a foot of rain in an hour. That's the data that I showed you on page 2. And then I said half a foot's a representative value. So I'm taking some nominative values that I can validate and come up with that. So what I did was, we've got 30 acres here, and I don't know exactly how much territory of that is going to be paved or where you're going to have water collection, either from a roof to a gutter, basketball courts to a runoff, driveways, streets, all the other things. Having lived in Houston on 0.2 acre lot, I can tell you that when the water comes down hard, everything just immediately, it goes to flood. And the flat land down there is very difficult for it to drain off quickly. So the water will rise in a heavy thunderstorm. I had 6, 8 inches of water from a very heavy thunderstorm come down and sit. 30 minutes later, it's gone. But I've seen those type of events. So I'm basing that on the experiences I've seen. What I did was I changed the, excuse me, the 30 acres to, it's 1.3 million square feet. And if I just calculated some basic values, if 3/4 or 75% of it is collected, the water's collected on it, you've got 980,000 square feet of collection. 65%, 850,000, 55%, 720,000. And then what I did is, okay, how do we get a grasp of that? So I said, let's take a football field, okay? And a football field's 48,000 square feet. It's 300 feet long, 160 wide. Okay, so if you take the amount of water, 6 inches of water that falls onto that, given, let's say, 60, let's use the 65%. I put a max and min at the bottom for the figures I did, but a half a foot of water at 65% would be between 10.2 and 7.5 feet deep on a football field, and that's a rectangular, that would be a cube or a square. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a feel for the stormwater problem. It's not well defined, nobody's really been able to put many figures at it, but I'm coming up here with some, I think, some reasonable estimate that says you're gonna, in an afternoon with wet ground that's not gonna absorb, you're going to have a football field of water anywhere from 8, 9, 10 feet high to deal with that's going to collect. And I hope the engineer is correct and Mr. Flam is wrong, but my hunch tells me I think it's the other way around. I don't think that water's going to go anywhere except in his house. And it's going to flood out and it's not going to be able to go anywhere. They haven't shown me a retention pond that could handle that much water. Now, if I could direct you to the third page. What I did is I pulled up my property from the county auditors, and I used a filtering to overlay contours. And if you look at contours, I'm very familiar with them. Retired military officer. Yes, sir. This one right here. Yeah. Okay. So, being a retired military officer, a ground combat officer, I'm very familiar with contours. And what I did was I took a look, and if you look at the bottom one, they're not extremely bright in color, but except you'll see the upper one is lighter, and the bottom one I've overlaid in red. Mine came out nicely. But if you look at that, the area in the middle is, that brown area is what MI Homes wants to develop. If you look at the outline that I've shown, that's the drainage that drains into the area that MI Homes wants to build in. It's not just a small little area there, but everything inside that lower area is a feeder for the very bottom down there where Mr. Flam owns his house. Second of all, if you take a look at the upper one, that goes on the other side of a small finger, but all that water that collects up in there also goes down here and meets downstream of where MI Homes was going to build their property. What I'm trying to suggest with this is, if you get a large event, a 2-inch event, you probably can handle this over some time. I'm more concerned with the 5, the 6-inch, the 8-inch event that comes in, that all of a sudden you have overwhelmed this subdivision, the detention ponds, and the surrounding area, so that you're going to get some very large flood event down there toward the bottom of MI Homes and into the western subdivision as well too. And my concern would be is that now all of a sudden, because this has been brought up and it's been bypassed or approved that it's okay, then who has the liability now to carry for an event like this? And that's my main concern. So do you have any questions for me? I can explain anything else.
Stuff that should be considered at the county level or at our level? I'm talking specific to the stormwater. Area lighting, and boy, this is the best meeting I've ever been at. What a bunch of bright people. They have really brought in some bright people from both sides. But that said, this stormwater stuff, is this,
So
I want to do this right, are we allowed to consider this? I'm going to ask Scott that.
I would just say the same thing, that you should consider what the 7, I guess, elements that are before you pursuant to the zoning resolution.
I just want to make sure we're
Stormwater
doing
is
this
not one of
legally correctly. But it's very informative. Don't take it the wrong way. I don't want to judge this the wrong way and then all of a sudden have somebody say, well, you weren't supposed to consider the stormwater. It's very informative. It really is. But I just want to make sure we're doing this right.
Okay. The last closing comment I would make is that I think the housing would be nice. I've talked to my neighbor who lives to the east of me about absorbing the panhandle. I don't see that as being a large problem. We can probably work that out. The bigger concern I've seen is when you shove that many people together in a small space, it makes it very difficult. You have to have the green spaces and they've designed those to carry some of the load for that. My concern is going to be some of the ancillary issues that come up, the sidewalk, getting to school. I think there'll be some others that'll address the overload on the sewage lift system. There's some additional areas that need to be discussed. But I thank you for your time.
Can I ask if you're on a public sewer or are you on a septic tank out there?
I am public. I have an easement that goes through into the one to the north of us. I forget the name.
Okay, so are all those houses to the west on sanitary sewers?
The panhandle, actually, the way I understand it, was an easement to be able to run a pipe from that lower, a sewage lift station pipe up through into the subdivision up on top, then the gravity would take over and pull it down.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, please. Hi, please state your name.
Yes, sir. Can you bring up my slides? Yes, sir.
You are, sir?
Sorry. Sean Cowan. I'm an attorney at Manley Burke. I'm here on behalf of my clients, Ken and Becky Pitcher.
Okay, thank you.
12009
Excuse me.
Pippin Road.
Your clients, is a resident there?
That's correct.
Okay.
Are you picking this up okay, Dana? Okay, good. Go ahead, please.
It's warming up right now.
Warming up.
I just want to make sure that the mic's picking up your...
Okay.
The first couple speakers were pretty loud. You're not as loud as them.
All right, I'll try to speak up.
Okay,
too.
thank you.
All right, so we already got through the introductory part. My name is Sean Cowan. I'm an attorney at Manley Burke. I'm here on behalf of my clients. If you could flip the, let's see, turn this. Turn that so that it picks this up. There we go. We had this working earlier. So the first slide I put up here is a site plan just showing the outline of the proposed development generally. The red area outlined in the northeast corner is the Pitcher's Lot. And I don't know if you've had a chance to go out there and view the surrounding properties, but I can tell you that Ken and Becky have a beautiful home over there on Pippin Road. It sits on approximately 8 acres. There's a long driveway coming up from Pippin to the top of the hill where their home sits. And in the backyard, there is the remnants of an old apple orchard. It looks like a woods now, but it's a gorgeous, gorgeous home up there. They asked me to come here, and I was also at the Zoning Commission hearing, but they asked me to come here to address some of their legal concerns. You've been hearing from the residents about their factual concerns regarding this development. We've heard a lot about stormwater and some other issues. I would say, from my perspective, when I view the request that's been made of you, it's a request to amend the zoning map, to amend the map from R4 and R6 to RPD. That is a legislative act. You're not acting in your quasi-judicial capacity where you're evaluating something or making some kind of determination about facts according to standards. You're being asked to pass legislation, amending your zoning map. So I think as you sit here and you can consider what you should evaluate, I think you should evaluate your duties in that context. But in any event, our legal concerns basically fall into 3 buckets. The first is the process. And I want to look at the amendment application itself. We talked about this at the Zoning Commission hearing. I didn't hear anybody talking about it here tonight, but I do want to bring it to the board's attention. Second, planning. We've heard a lot about the comprehensive plan. We've reviewed the comprehensive plan, and we have a different idea of what it says and how and whether this proposed development is consistent with it. And then finally, we have some sort of off-planning concerns related to traffic in schools. We'll get to that. It's not really mentioned in the comprehensive plan, but it's certainly something that this board can and should consider in this case. So looking first at the amendment application itself. This is a copy of the original application as it was filed in the zoning office. When my client, Ken Pitcher, learned of this application, he filed a Freedom of Information Act request on the township. I think the fiscal officer responded to it, and this was a document that was produced. And I've highlighted some areas here to particularly point them out, and you'll see why in a moment. When we got to the Zoning Commission and the application in the form that has been presented to you, it looked like this, all right? This is an amended or altered official document. I've got blow-ups of this, but as you can see here, the areas I've highlighted are different on the original form produced pursuant to the Freedom of Information Act request than they are before you here today and in your packets. And I'll blow these up. We can take a closer look. On the original application, you had a case number. You had a date of filing, which you can it's hard to see this pointer up there, but it's in the upper right-hand corner of this application, and that says 4/3/19. That's April 3rd of 2019. I'm going to ask that you remember that date because I'm going to come back to it later. But it also has the zoning district that exists currently identified as R4, and then MI Homes phone number is listed at 513-245. Now, if you look at the application that's before you tonight and the one that was presented to the Zoning Commission, there is no case number. The date of filing has been altered, and it now says it was filed on August 3rd, 2019. The existing, current zoning district designation is R4 and now R6, and again, that appears to be handwritten in. By the way, all of these changes appear to be handwritten. I'm not sure who made them, but it appears to have been changes made by the zoning department itself. And then the phone number is changed, the MI Homes phone number. Likewise, at the bottom of the page, the original application had a received stamped on the bottom right of the documents. Received September 3rd, 2019, Colerain zoning. The document, the application before the board tonight, has no such date, no such stamp. So this isn't just a change in the application form itself. Now we've altered or amended what is an official act of Colerain Township when it received this zoning application. You now cannot tell that from the record that is in the packet before the Board of Trustees tonight. So to me, this is all very important. I mean, what we've got here is a legal document, an official record that has been modified since the time it was submitted to the time it's being reviewed by this board. So when we were at the Zoning Commission, this was explained by the zoning department as somewhat harmless, and it was sort of a so what kind of thing. What the gist of it that I got was that the original application was wrong in identifying the existing zoning district designations. Only R4 was identified, and it's really R4 and R6. So what the zoning department did was renotice the hearing before the Zoning Commission to correct that deficiency. And you know what? I don't really have a problem with that. That's fine. The problem is you've modified an official public record. They didn't just renotice the hearing and say, oh, by the way, we got it wrong. They changed history to make it match up with what occurred after the fact. Why is it a big deal? Well, first of all, it's contrary to the zoning resolution. The zoning resolution requires that the zoning administrator keep adequate records of all applications and decisions. We don't have that anymore. We don't have a record of the first application. The only reason we do have it is because Mr. Pitcher made a public records request. The zoning process requires that this application go to all of these other agencies, not regional planning anymore, but all of the others, Hamilton County Stormwater, Colerain Township Fire, Hamilton County Soil and Water, ODOT, et cetera. All of those agencies got the original application. They did not get the amended application. So none of that happened. The application file sitting before you has not been reviewed by any of these agencies. Now, ODOT may give a hill of beans about what the existing zoning district designation was or should have been, but we don't know because they never reviewed the amended application. Not to mention, there's an easy alternative to altering the official public record of this case. Get the applicant to resubmit it, right? It's not that big a deal. Fix it and resubmit it. Retain both versions of the applications in the file. Then we have the original as submitted and the corrected version as amended. And by the way, the zoning resolution recognizes that this may happen from time to time. And generally speaking, application fees are not refundable. But if the application was accepted in error, for instance, in a case where the zoning district designation was misidentified, you can get your application fee back. So this would not have cost the applicant any money. But that, again, easy fix, but wasn't done. What does this really do? What are the citizens concerned about when they see something like this? They're concerned about transparency in the township government. Right now, what you've got is a document that's clearly been altered and has been presented to the Board of Trustees for action. That's not correct. There has to be an explanation for that. There has to be some transparent reason that happened. Accountability. Who is the zoning department accountable to in this case? They certainly made life easier on MI Homes. Are they accountable to MI Homes, or is it accountable to the constituents of Colerain Township, the residents of Colerain Township? And this is probably the most important part, fairness and integrity in the process. When you have something like this occur, and you have a developer given basically a runway to an approval hearing, it brings up serious questions of fairness and integrity in the process, questions that my clients have and questions that you will hear reflected throughout the audience. Now, those questions of fairness and integrity are amplified when we hear staff come in and say, look, we should approve this or the developer will build a really bad development. And the developer comes in and confirms staff's fear, right? The developer came in and said, look, you can either approve this 68 lots or we'll build 68 lots out under straight zoning and go straight to the county and get approval. Well, let me investigate that a little bit with you. This is the development plan. As you'll see, I have highlighted here the cul-de-sacs. We got 3 cul-de-sacs, basically 4 cul-de-sacs, one of which is a stub street over there on the west side of of the development. Now, they say they can get 68 homes into this area under straight zoning, going to Hamilton County and getting a straight subdivision review. So we actually pulled out the Hamilton County subdivision regulations to see if that's actually so. And there's a couple of provisions in the subdivision regulations that have something to say about a development like this. And I've highlighted, I didn't want to hand you 78 pages of subdivision regulations. It's not that interesting. So I pulled out what I thought was relevant, and it's 12.3.10, and in particular, these provisions. Here's the first one, 12.3.10A, cul-de-sacs. A cul-de-sac, series of cul-de-sacs, or any other combination of permanent dead-end streets shall not provide access to more than 30 lots, all right? 30 lots. So if you're going to have cul-de-sacs within your subdivision, the regs don't allow you to have more than 30 lots. There is a caveat to that. It says it can be modified if the developer satisfies 15 other factors, and I didn't list them all out. But one of the most important is that the number of lots is consistent with the recommendation of the adopted township plan. So it's not that the township wouldn't have any input into a straight-up subdivision. It would, because of the structure of the subdivision itself. Stub streets. This allows for a little bit more flexibility because the idea is, look, we might have a secondary access in the future, so let us build a few more houses. Okay, let's even assume that's true. So you have one access point and one stub lot. You could build 60 lots, all right? But that's assuming that Hamilton County Regional Planning determines that that street is a stub street. Because before you get the benefit of the 60 lots, you're required to show that the stub street extension is feasible and practical. Right now, that property, the stub property, is owned by the church. It's not owned by the developer. No prospect of being owned by the developer. I don't think that's feasible or practical. If they really wanted to show that, they would have some plan for how that street gets extended. So the bottom line here, in my view, is when you have 3 cul-de-sacs and a stub street, Hamilton County is going to say, you're limited to 30 lots. That's probably what Hamilton County is going to approve here. You might get more, but you're never going to get more than 60 as long as you got a stub street, not 68. They could never get 68 without the approval of these trustees here, no matter which direction they went. And it explains why MI waited until September to file this application. I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you to remember that date, April 3rd, 2019. I forgot it. April 3rd, 2019. When I saw that in the original application, I always wondered to myself, why didn't they file it right then? Why wasn't this application filed until September? And I started thinking about it after I saw what the township trustees had done by basically using their limited home rule. The trustees decided that we're not going to take these rezoning applications to regional planning anymore, right? We're going to go straight to the zoning commission and then straight to the trustees for a final decision. That legislation, that resolution became effective in late August. In April, when this was originally set to be filed, this developer would have had to have gone to regional planning. By waiting until September, it avoided regional planning because regional planning would have looked at the plan and said, you can't build that many lots. You can't do that under our regulations, much less whatever Colerain Township may have to say about it. We're not going to let you do it with cul-de-sacs and stub streets. So it explains a lot. Reading the subdivision regulations was informative. I understood a lot more about the timing of this development, but it also sheds light on the reality of what's going on here. We're being threatened, or the township is being threatened with something that could never, ever happen. Right? It's disingenuous, it's presumptuous, it's arrogant. Now, looking at the comprehensive plan itself, this is more just sort of straight up rezoning type analysis. Nothing, too extraordinary here, but I think we all agree that we have to zone in accordance with a comprehensive plan. If the township has zoning like Colerain does, it's required under statute that that zoning be implemented in accordance with the comprehensive plan. So we have to follow the plan, and the plan says, among other things that are relevant to this application, maximize your roadway connections. What does that mean? Page 17 of the comprehensive plan tells us that means minimizing cul-de-sacs. Page 20, in suburban neighborhoods like this one, the use of cul-de-sacs should be minimized in new developments. The reason for this is obvious. What you basically got here is one way in and one way out for all your emergency vehicles and services. You know? And then when you have a stub street, by the way, they can't turn around. That stub street's more dangerous than a cul-de-sac. The only reason the stub street is there is so that they can go to Hamilton County Regional Planning and try to get their 30 lots that they're allowed juiced up to 60. Other than that, there's no reason to have the stub street. But it puts you, Colerain Township residents, in danger to have it. Now, this is the land use plan specific to the Beavis Pleasant Run area where this proposed development lies. And what this specific plan says is no cul-de-sacs. So in this particular land use area, yeah, we're looking to minimize them, but we really want no cul-de-sacs in this area. So that's what the comprehensive plan says about cul-de-sacs and how the roadways should be connected. And again, here's that same drawing showing, not only are we not minimizing them, we got 3 of them, and a stub street, which again is more dangerous than the cul-de-sacs themselves. Density. Density, you'll hear a lot about it. This proposal basically takes density and takes it to the maximum level, even, imaginable. What the comprehensive plan says is that density for new development should be compatible with the density of existing development surrounding the area. Okay? Here is the existing development surrounding the area. This is large lot rural zoning. You can see the development area there in the center of the screen, right to the west of the letters where it says Beautiful Savior Lutheran School. Everything around it, large lot, rural development, or a church, or a fire station. Across the street, I think that's an actual farm. But it's nothing like what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is completely out of character when you consider, again, the density of existing development. Existing development is large lot. Now, if you look at it like the developer does and you sort of back out and say, well, the area is really bigger than that, okay. So we got Kingsbridge over there on the east, developed in 1970, and yes, they had a small lot size over there. Spruce Way to the north in 1978, lot size around 11,000 square feet, so getting bigger. And then the last one, Hunterston over there on the west, 1998, now you got an average lot size of 14,000, which is approaching what's required under the existing zoning. So what you can tell from this is that, yeah, okay, density was we had more dense developments in the 70s that we sort of modified that and made it a little bit bigger as we learned something in the 90s. And by the way, all of this was before planning. The comprehensive plan was adopted in 2005. So, the planners went through a lot of work to develop, guidelines for how these kinds of cases should be evaluated. And we certainly shouldn't be reversing, the density trajectory. If anything, we should be expanding it. Making it more like the rural area that it truly is. Comprehensive plan also tells us what to expect of developers when it comes to open space. With open spaces, comprehensive plan notes that residents have demonstrated frustration with developments that receive incentives for development in return for preservation of open space when the open space is land that, because of development constraints, could not be developed in the first place. And that's exactly what we have here. I got a couple slides to show you. So mine's not as cool as what MI had, but I did this myself on MS Paint, so that's why you get that. But so if you see the brown area that's hashtag there, that is the open space that MI is proposing. So you can sort of see where that is. And then we took a picture, from Cages, or not Cages, but the overheads, satellite photos, to show what this area really looks like. The area highlighted in red, I think it was Mr. Fram said this, that is a very steep area. I mean, from the bottom line of that red area to the corner, the northwest corner of the property, that's about a 50-foot drop. And it drops down into that creek. Then you can see that creek looping through from west to east. And then again, a very, very steep slope up by the right-of-way, which is also proposed as open area. So if you can see where the steep slopes are in the northwest corner, and then the southern flat part, or southern sort of part up by Kemper Road, and then you see the creeks, and then you take another look again at where the common areas are, the open spaces, that's it, all right? So basically our open areas are the hilly areas of the site and the creeks. So we're doing it here exactly what the comprehensive plan asks us not to do, which is preserve open space that couldn't have ever been developed in the first place. So these open spaces are clearly, to me, inconsistent with what is envisioned in the comprehensive plan. Now, looking back at the provision related to open spaces, the plan tells us that improved open spaces are a priority over the preservation of areas in a natural state. Improvements could include walking or biking paths, playgrounds, or other uses that will create an amenity for nearby residents. We don't have any of that here, all right? So there is no walking path, there's no biking path, there's no playground, there is no other improvement that any resident might find attractive. That just doesn't exist in this plan. So again, the open spaces proposed in this plan are inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. Now, traffic in schools, we heard a little bit about this, but I want to revisit it. Technically, this isn't a comprehensive plan issue. It is an issue for zoning, and this has been in the case law for a long, long time, that local governments may lawfully regulate safety hazards, including protection of pedestrians and drivers and elimination of traffic congestion. So traffic, without a doubt, is a valid consideration that can form the basis for a zoning decision. And in fact, we're going to have to think about it because the Hamilton County engineer already told us that we should. Hamilton County engineer, when presented with this development, or at least the original version of this development, said this proposed development will generate additional traffic and congestion. Will generate additional traffic and congestion. Not maybe or if, it will. The developer must, therefore, have a traffic impact analysis report prepared by a qualified traffic engineer. This has been out there since September, this request from the engineer. I brought it up last month at the Zoning Commission meeting, or a month and a half ago at this point. To this date, the developer has not done a traffic study. And I can't for the life of me imagine why not. Again, I think it's presumptive and arrogant to come in here and ask you for relief when he knows he needs a traffic study and yet refuses to get it. So I don't know how the trustees in good faith could approve it without knowing what the contents of that traffic study might show. Now the developer wants you to say, okay, we'll approve the plan, go get the traffic study and do what it says. Well, that's not really a fantastic exercise of your discretion, and it doesn't really fulfill all the due diligence that I think we would expect of trustees in making this kind of a zoning decision. This decision, quite frankly, is going to have a dramatic impact on that neighborhood. And right now, we don't know what the traffic outcome of this development will be. And we won't until the developer gets a traffic study, which he's known about for months. So I would encourage the trustees to be very cautious about approving this development without this study. The sidewalk, we talked about this at great length. As we know, these kids are going to be walking to school. The area where the sidewalk should go is sort of marked here in blue. And again, I can't use the pointer up there. But again, this is nothing new. Developer knew about this, knew about it since, at least since the Zoning Commission hearing, and I was there. It needs to be addressed. The plan now sounds like, here, I'll write you a check for $75,000. I'm not sure that that's an acceptable planning technique. It doesn't really seem to me that it is. I mean, if you can't put the sidewalk by the street, you got to find a spot for it. And again, developers had a long time to think about this, yet there's not a plan. No plan for the sidewalk, no plan on delivering those kids to school. So again, I think it would be, I'd be very cautious about approving this plan without some recognition or definition of what's going to happen here. And then the approval criteria, I know the developer went through it. We think the approval criteria, frankly, militate against approving this plan. Again, the very first one, the most important one, is that the proposed district and the development plan are consistent with the adopted Colerain Township comprehensive plan. We don't think this plan is consistent. We don't think it's consistent as to density. We don't think it's consistent as to open spaces. And we don't think it's consistent as to the traffic connections, the cul-de-sacs, the stub street. We think it's very inconsistent with the adopted comprehensive plan, as did the zoning commission, by the way. That was one of the specific findings of the zoning commission, is that this plan was not consistent with the comprehensive plan. The site will be accessible from public roads that are generally adequate to carry traffic. We don't know that. We don't have a traffic study that says that. We do have the developer saying this is a second level arterial street, and we got, a Cincinnati police officer who specializes in traffic reconstruction telling us it's dangerous. We don't know. So again, I would urge that this approval criteria militates strongly against approving this plan. Preliminary development plan has been transmitted to all other agencies and departments charged with responsibility review. Again, that didn't happen. Yes, the original application was transferred to all the other agencies, but the application before you has not been transmitted to those agencies. The amended, altered official public record that is before you has not been reviewed by ODOT or Hamilton County Soil and Water or MSD or any of the other agencies that you usually look to. Now, when I get a decision like this, I like to make lists, checklists, so I can sort of figure out which way the balance is moving on me here. And so I decided to sort of do that here and just sort of show at least how my client looks at it and how I look at it. So developers offering you some open space, it's about 9% more than it's required, under a normal PD process. And they're agreeing, thankfully, not to clear cut the site, that's nice. They're not going to go with straight zoning. What do they want? They want a 44% lot size reduction for minimum lot size. They want a 26% lot size reduction for the average lot size. They want 19% more units than what was approved in Slonica Reserve. And Slonica Reserve was that subdivision that staff showed you that got approved back in 2005 for this site, where even Mr. Slonica only came in with 58 units, not 68 like MI is proposing under straight zoning. And by the way, Slonica Reserve at this is 57 units, I apologize, never got built, right? It never got built. It fell apart for who knows what reasons, but here's what I do know, is that Slonica got approved in 2005. Hamilton County subdivision regulations got amended in 2015. So Slonica wasn't subject to the same regulations that MI is subject to today. And presumably that's why Slonica was able to even build that or construct that plan the way he did. Because back then, they didn't have limitations on cul-de-sacs and stub streets. Now they do. So, I think somebody said in the main presentation that Slonica could just be built again today. It cannot. It cannot. It would not get approval through Planning Commission under the current regulations. Developer also wants substandard lot width, substandard front yard setbacks, substandard side yard setbacks. It's not quite all. They want approval without a traffic study, so we can't tell what the traffic impact of this development will be. They want approval with no plan for getting children to school. Approval with no plan for a sidewalk on Kemper. Approval with no plan for usable open space or any other common amenity. Approval with 4 cul-de-sacs or 3 cul-de-sacs and 1 stub street, whatever you want to call it. And, as I've said from the beginning, approval of a plan that is inconsistent with the Colerain Township comprehensive plan. It's inappropriate. Now, I know that staff came up and said that the developer's not asking for action from the trustees tonight. I know, speaking on behalf of my client, we are asking for action. We are asking that you deny this application. I don't know what the plan from the development side is, if it's to keep stringing this out, adding more conditions, modifying this, putting a tree here, a tree there, a fence, whatever. how many times are residents expected to come back to deal with that kind of minutia? The plan itself is flawed. The plan is overdense. It's got cul-de-sacs that can't be fixed, traffic that likely can't be fixed, no way to build a sidewalk to transport these kids to school, at least not the way it's being presented now, and it's too dense. It's not consistent with the surrounding area as is required by the plan. So we would ask that you deny the plan and ask that the developer come back in with something that is consistent with a comprehensive plan. Thank you. And if you have any questions.
Thank you. It is, what time is it? 9:50, and I'm going to ask that if I could get a motion to recess for about 10 minutes, just because everybody's been sitting here for 3 hours, and this has been great presentations from both sides, and so
Yeah, I
do I need to
second the
do,
motion.
if we want to, I will motion that we recess and return at 10 o'clock. It's 9:49 right now. And I motion, and Raj seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Heather, please call for a vote.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Yes.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
Yes.
So we will take a 10-minute recess, and I'm going to ask everybody in the audience, please do not discuss this with the trustees, because all the people that are sworn in, please don't discuss any of this during this recess. Okay, I'm going to call this meeting back to order. Heather, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Rajagopal? Aye. Mr. Unger?
Here?
Mr. Waller?
Here.
I'd like to continue with the next speaker, whoever that was. Please state your name for the record and your address.
Thanks, gentlemen. My name is Ken Pitcher. My wife Becky and I live, as Sean showed you, in that upper right-hand corner, the northeast corner of the property that abuts it. We are both long-term residents of Colerain Township. I grew up on Crest Road, which is about a mile south as the crow flies from where I live right now. And so I know the property very, very well. Been there for, like I said, the biggest part of my life. And so as a Colerain Township resident, we've put a substantial investment into our property. We've put a very attractive house on the property, so we put a lot of money into it, and I'm really cringing, Dan, as a result of you telling me all this big tax increase I'm going to get, but we voted for that, to put that through on behalf of our schools. I'm hoping, you said some other agency, but anyway, I don't want to detract too much from what I was talking about here. So we made a substantial investment, and we've been here all of our life. So I'm going to also ask you, just as everybody else has been asking you on our side of the table over here, is to not approve the zoning change to this property. We don't want that to happen. So I'm going to give you a little bit of historical background. As you heard, I got involved with filing a Freedom of Information Act so that I could gather all the information about this. I came down to the zoning office, and it's called Zoning and Planning if you look on the door out there. So I'll just refer to it as ZMP. But the planning aspect seems to be somewhat lax in this whole thing. I'm not finding planning in this whole thing. You know, on November 19th, which is really, it's a little more than a month after it was originally scheduled, this got deferred. This was going to be in mid-October that we were going to have this meeting, so it was getting very much fast-tracked. And I don't know why it's been so fast-tracked, but everything's been done in haste here, and haste to the point of ignoring the problems that are associated with this development. And I think I understand it from MI's perspective. This is revenue motivated. To get this greater density, they need this in order to meet the profit motives and the return on investment they're looking for. But at that PowerPoint presentation on November 19th, the ZMP department, they went over their list of requirements for approval. This meeting lasted for over 2 hours at that time. And at that time, our zoning commissioners got to listen to all of the pros and the cons, both sides, and by a vote of 4-1, they voted not to approve this. You've heard that before. But ZMP is advocating for a zoning change despite the recognition in their presentation that the sidewalks, both from an amenity standpoint, as well as providing the school-age children safe passage to and from school, is not addressed. As Sean told you, the engineer's office has not yet issued a letter that a traffic study has been completed. They've not responded to that request. And yet no study's been done at this point in time. Sean very well addressed that. The chief concern of zoning and planning, as I see it, has been the objective of making MI plant some trees and put some stone on the front of houses, rather than the concern for the impact this has on the well-being of our existing residents, as well as the people who would occupy these new homes, because they're going to be impacted. I was really kind of surprised. This is a little bit off kilter from what I had in my presentation here, but when I saw the MI proposal here, and they dot the whole perimeter of the land, and they're going to put 4 houses against Mr. Flam's property where there was 1, and yet his own engineer over here has already come through, and surveyors, whatever, I'm not exactly sure what Abercrombie is exactly, but they've come through and they've looked at the problem with the water, and they're going to put 4 houses where that water problem is. So I'm a little bit more dumbfounded by the whole thing. They're going to now stick this right in the midst of what is already a problem. Likewise, back in the corner where it's heavily wooded, the reason that they don't want to take and do anything back there is because that's a lot of cost. You start having to put a lot of cost into grading out those hills and putting in piering and so forth. You're talking about really greatly extending the cost that's going to have to be absorbed over this subdivision. So I understand why they don't want to do that. It's because of surely a profit motive that they're addressing. But the permanent green space, we've all heard that, it sits on the side of hills, and it won't alleviate the water problems. So my feeling is there have been numerous attempts to deceive our residents. And it's not by just MI, but by our own zoning department. You know, we've heard from Marty Kohler and his plan, and some of these ways they flavor these discussions as open space, green space, comes along as pretty disingenuous because it's property that cannot even be acted upon. Now, I also got my letter at the end of September 29th from MI that says the home sales will average between $325,000 and $350,000. And you know what? That kind of assaulted my intelligence to begin with when I read that, because I thought, I'm not seeing that happening in our neck of the woods out there, and especially not with 1,400 to 1,600 square foot buildings. And so I did my own little research, and I presented this at the November 19th meeting as well. I went to the Greater Cincinnati Board of Realtors, and the MLS for the last 10 years, the Colerain is divided between east and west. West is west of Colerain Avenue, east is east of Colerain Avenue. There have been 5 houses which have sold for more than $300,000 since 2010. 10 years, 5 houses. Now on the other side, there's been, since 2015, there's been over 250 sold. I'm not saying there's not houses that are worth more than $300,000 in my area. I'm simply saying we're not a market for that. And to compare us to Mason is a real disservice. That's not the same. That's comparing apples and oranges. Because in the real estate business, location, location, location are the 3 factors. So I don't want to take and put there's some analogy and go up and see this Kennisbrook or whatever it's called subdivision and say, oh, well, that can be replicated right here in Colerain Township, because it can't. So as I said, I was put out by that letter, and then I think they have an opportunity here for a bait and switch of advertising higher prices, but knowing they'll have to drop the prices to attract the buyers. And that's a much easier thing to do when you can spread it over 68 lots as opposed to 30. So you've got a lot more sales volume to take your acquisition cost and your land development cost over. And so I don't like that being put upon me. And our zoning and planning department is ignoring the guidelines established in our Colerain Comprehensive Plan. When we built our house, it was under the guidelines of the Colerain Comprehensive Plan. We did everything in accordance with the existing rules and regulations. We didn't request that there be any zoning changes to accommodate us. There was a few things we would have liked to have done. We just had to live within the rules. And that's all I'm asking for here. Live within the rules. I stated it at the November 19th meeting. I don't have any problem with any kind of a developer coming in and putting in the homes consistent with the property. And that is at least follow the rules that we've all been asked to live with. And you know, one of the women who was a part of the zoning board, when she cited in her decision as to why she didn't want to approve that zoning change, she said, she also even specifically mentioned the comprehensive plan and said, you know what, that's been well thought out. Hours and hours and hours of time and effort have been spent on that. So why is it that we're not following that? And she said that was a factor she had in her decision. And so Z&P has thrown their full weight behind this zoning proposal while having failed to consider the planning side of this development on resident safety and the impact of the property of all of our surrounding Colerain citizens. And that gives me a lot of concern. Z&P ignored the safety issue. I'm not even going to go into that. We know what that's all about. They've ignored the dangers to our children, grades 1 through 9, required to walk to school. Now, I'm going to expand upon that just slightly because we've talked about all of this within their purview. Their purview is the property they own. They'll either write you a check for $75,000 or they'll put the sidewalks in according to what we say they need to put the sidewalks in. Okay, that's great. That gets them right up to the fire department. That gets the kids out of their development to the fire department. Now what happens? They're going to walk in front of the firehouse. They're going to walk behind the firehouse. They're going to get across the firehouse. The firemen are good, conscientious people. They're not going to run over the kids. I can't say what's going to happen when they get beyond the fire department, because then we're going to go past one of the other neighbor's house, and it's a straight drop off of his building lot at the top of the hill, straight down to the road. That was old Bill Sloniker's house. He was my bus driver when I was a kid. So he owned that house. So there's no room. There's about as much room as from me to that table between the end of that slope coming off that hill and the road. And there's nothing to separate those. They'd have to put a guardrail for me to feel comfortable that those kids are protected. Furthermore, they get to the corner of Kemper and Pippin Road. Each of those roads has a left-hand turn lane. So you're talking about going over more than three lanes of traffic. Now, the other thing is they all flange off. So it's really almost analogous to going 3.5 to 4, cost 3.5 to 4 roads. There is no crosswalk there. There's no crosswalk to get across Pippin. There's one crosswalk to get across Pippin, or across Kemper. It's on the east side of Pippin Road. One. Did you have a question?
I'm just thinking of where that, I'm visualizing this.
Okay, there's one. There's a sidewalk right there. They can stand on that corner sidewalk. There's a church right there. And then they go across towards, so they're going to go south towards Pleasant Run Junior High and the elementary school. And it dumps off across the street, and there's no sidewalks. Mr. Schneider's property right there, it slopes right down a hill, and he's got a big garden right there. So those kids are actually forced to be into the streets. So there's problems with this plan, and this is where I look at our zoning and planning, and I'm actually really perturbed at zoning and planning for pushing this thing through so quickly. And I actually came over here and had my meeting with the head of the zoning plan, and I didn't come away a happy camper, I can tell you that. And part of it is because how I was approached to begin with. I got to the front door, and he said, well, are you for it or against it? I'm like, don't I need to know more about it before I can be for or against something? Oh, yeah. Well, then, oh, you got some time? Come on back. So I felt like it was being shoved down my throat. And that feeling of being shoved down my throat has persisted throughout this entire process. I felt nothing more than this has been shoved down my throat. And not by you guys, but my Z&P department. And I'm very unhappy with that. Matter of fact, I may have to have a little conversation with Mr. Mills later about this, because this is really aggravating me. But anyway, so I'm going to continue on. So we've ignored the water problem, and I'd even say that they tried to fast-track this zoning change to create even a greater problem, since the rooftops, driveways, and the roads will even be a greater water displacement. This issue needs resolution before we'd ever approve any kind of a zoning change. The other thing about planning, I brought this up in the November 19th meeting. MI Homes is a public company. As such, they put out an annual report. In the annual report, they say they prepare extensive analyses of each property considered for development ahead of the property acquisition. They consider the return on investment. Okay, where's that at in our files? Where did zoning and planning Go look at this. Where did they request this? It didn't happen. It did not happen. So what is the real impetus behind trying to get a zoning change here? It's trying to accommodate a profit motive of MI Homes. I'm a capitalist. I'm a businessman. I can understand the reason for it. I don't have bad feelings against Brad Austin. I know he's doing a job, but still, nonetheless, I feel like there's been a lot of deception played out, and I don't care for the deception. Let's just call a spade when it comes to some of this stuff. And so, but our zoning and planning department didn't do anything. They didn't even ask about this. It's public records. You know, I mean, they're telling you that they've prepared an extensive analysis of each property. Where is it? And the zoning and planning says, it erroneously says that it's important for Colerain to have a say in the development so to ensure certain amenities are provided, like the stone. Well, the marketplace will tell you that. If you're going to sell homes for $325,000 to $350,000 on average, you're not going to sell these vinyl siding homes that are 1,400 square feet. And to tell me that you're going to take, and the zoning department's we're going to come after them to make them put some stone on the front? Well, the marketplace does that. We don't have to do that. To provide 2 extra trees in addition to some other trees, that's nothing. Sean, I didn't even know what he was going to do about the pros and cons, but boy, it was great because I had not seen that before. And it was perfect. It summed up so many things. So there's these very little pros and a lot of cons. And a lot of cons to our existing constituency here. And so I just don't want to see this thing get fast-tracked through. And so that's why, you know, I don't understand the ZNP's effort to push this poorly conceived zoning change upon our Colerain citizens. If MI really wants to go through this, come back, work with zoning and planning, and come back and build something that's inconsistent with our comprehensive plan. And I'm welcoming that. And so, like I said, you know, I think it's telltale when they're showing that they're going to push this 68-acre development or 68 home development around the perimeter, but they're going to have water that's going to race down the sides of hills and inundate their own constituents that they're putting in there, which are going to be my fellow Colerain Township residents someday. And I don't want to see that happen. So I'm asking you to deny the zoning change and require MI to develop the property in a manner that's consistent with our current zoning requirements. And so, like I said, the zoning trustees heard over 2 hours of comments on this, and they, by an overwhelming 80%, voted to not recommend a change. I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you for your comments. Was there another speaker? Hello?
My name's Calvin Hunter. I live at 3220 West Kemper, and I live on the corner of the Hunterston development. My mom and dad owned the property, and my grandfather before that, and Hunterston was developed in 1998, 1997, 1998, much to their desire to keep the property, health and retirement reasons, and that kind of forced them to take an offer that Dries had provided. Dries Company developed the property. They were originally asking for an R6 PD development with 286 homes in the property on 100 acres, or a little less than 100 acres. Through whatever process, the community kind of came in an uproar because it was mostly farmland and farming community at that time. It was rejected. They had to come down, and they settled on an R4 zoning regulation for the housing. They also provided all the amenities, walking paths, green space, playground, and a large retention pond or water pond in the front of the property, which you can see as you go down Kemper Road. This retention pond will take all of whatever comes down the hill from Abbeytown and whatever other, however form it takes. I can give you an actual history. I'm not going to go into it, but I grew up on that farm. I'm 69 years old right now. I grew up on the Hunter farm that's now Hunterston, and when I was a youngster, We had a flood down that same creek that we're talking about, all this drainage coming down from the Sloniker property. We had a flood that was over 8 feet high in that creek where all that drainage is coming to. That was probably a once in 100-year rainfall. I think Don or Tom or whoever talked about that, and from the engineering side of it. Since Hunterston has been built, that was 20 years ago, approximately 21 years, we've had another major watershed that had at least 4 feet down that same creek into Hunterston over top of the underground drainage pipe, which I think is like 34, 36 inch, that sort of like took the place of the creek. But on top of that was another 4 feet. I talked to my neighbors behind me who are right on the edge of that swale where the creek used to be, and they had 4 feet of water coming down that ravine into our retention pond. So anyway, that's just what has happened in the past. As far as the zoning and the density and all that stuff, the layout has been characterized as urban, R6, whatever. Actually, everything west of Pippin Road and down Kemper, down Crest Road, is all definitely R4, residential, large land plots, and it hasn't, anything to the east is, the high-density residential buildings that were, homes that were built in the 60s and the 70s. That was a necessity of a growing community. It's not the same kind of requirement as we have today, where we are looking at, almost purely rural as you come over the hill from Pippin Road down Kemper toward Dunlap. That whole area, Kemper, Dunlap, Bank Road, Lick Road, Dunlap area, Dunlap Road, over the hill, all of that to the west is very much R4 zone, and large property, large houses. We talked about the cost of houses in that area. The other thing that I did want to mention is that in the discussion of the planning and the zoning proposals, they talk about public sewers. There is no public sewer in anything west of Pippin Road. The sewage that is in Hunterston Subdivision and is strictly was built privately by Dries Corporation and their development group. It is a pumping station that pumps the sewage from the lower left hand of that Hunterston Subdivision, as you saw it on the map. It pumps it diagonally across the whole subdivision up to John Gray Road. And at John Gray Road, it's kind of the Fairfield-Hamilton County border there. It goes into the Mill Creek, is downstream or downhill. There's nothing in the planning in the next 10 years or even in the foreseeable future, in my lifetime certainly, that there will ever be an actual MSD treatment plant down toward the Bank Lick Creek, or down to, that runs out toward the Great Miami River, toward Fairfield and Ross. So it is, the land is still taxed and paid by the Hunterston Homeowners Association. I haven't gotten a clear answer from MSD what the sizing was based on that pumping station, but there's a finite amount of pumping that it can pump sewage up to John Gray Road and out. It was built as a private, for that development. And even though there's an extension that does run up toward where Abbeytown is supposing to tie in, we're looking at that capacity of that pumping station. So it's not really a public sewage. It is in technical terms perhaps, but it was built specifically for Hunterston for the 186 homes that ended up, they re-downsized their plan from the R6 PD to an R4 PD, and most of the residents there seem to be very pleased with the country environment that they're living in. The last comment, we talked about safety. The There have been numerous incidents of accidents and one motorcycle fatality at the entrance to Hunterston coming out. If we look to the east up toward the water tower and toward Pippin Road, they've got clear visual for it's about a half a mile from the entrance of, actually it's about a quarter of a mile from the entrance of Hunterston up to Pippin Road. It's a 50-mile-an-hour speed zone. Well, not speed zone, but 50-mile rated highway. And there have been numerous accidents there. We live right at the bottom of the hill at the beginning of Hunterston Subdivision, and I continually hear tires screeching, people zooming down the hill. They're not expecting that car to turn in to Hunter Green. And the same with the ours and those families that have their homes, Flams and everybody else that's up on the adjacent property to Abbeytown. They can talk to that or speak to that personal experiences there. But it is a very dangerous road. Even people coming up, going east toward Pippin, I heard a car just yesterday that had to be going about 60, and they like to crank it up that straightaway up the hill. So safety is a big issue. We've talked about it, sidewalks, crossings, and everything else. One last comment, it's kind of a question. Is the report back or comments back from Colerain Fire, is that published in the submittal or anything that has been, because the original one presented to the Zoning Commission had no comment or no response from Colerain Fire. My daughter or two daughters and grandkids stopped at the fire station at 109 at the corner of Pippin and Kemper. Christmas Eve, they were giving away cookies to the firefighters, and they asked them about the development of Hunterston or of Abbeytown, and they said, we haven't heard anything about it. So, and they're the ones that respond. They would have to respond to the families in the distress. And the comment was also made, a cul-de-sac, you can't turn one of those big engines around in a cul-de-sac, to get to wherever you need to go. So that was my only question I know the response from MSD and the Hamilton County engineers, and that was published. I'm just curious if there was any comment back from the Colerain Fire. That's all I have to say on that.
Thank you, and I'll let Jeff answer that later. Is there another speaker that's sworn? Hello?
Hi, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. Please state your name and address, please.
Excuse me. My name is Gloria R., 3110 West Kemper Road. My property is right to the west of where they want to put in the entrance to Abbeytown. I'm the next property. And I'm basically talking about safety. In the time we've been there, at least 10, 12 cars have come in my yard, one very close to the house, rolled over, speeding down, one coming up the hill. They've taken out our mailboxes 3 times. When we try to, as I'm trying to slow down to pull in my driveway, cars are flying down, they're coming across, coming around me instead of just waiting. They come flying around me, and it's just a very, very dangerous place to, I'm wondering why they could you not put the entrance up by the fire station?
We're not having,
Okay.
that's a comment, that's not a question.
Okay, I'm sorry, okay.
No problem.
But I just want to say that it's too dangerous. It's really, really, they're not going 50 miles an hour. If they're going 50, they're going 60, 65. There's motorcycles that are going probably 80. And I'm not kidding, you can hear them, my house is well insulated, and I can hear them flying up the hill. So I would like, if they are going to approve this, I would like the entrance put up by the fire station, just because I think they wouldn't have they wouldn't be starting down so fast, and so there would be less chance of an accident. Because I have grandchildren on the same private drive, on both private drives. My one son lives on the same as me, and the other one lives right across from his brother. I have grandchildren driving, coming in and out, and it's very dangerous. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Is there another sworn speaker?
My name's Kevin Girth. I live at 3140 West Kemper Road. I live on the private drive that comes up from the west side of Abbeytown with the proposing. My first concern is I don't have city water at my house. I got our wells. They're located pretty much right next to the retention ponds that they're proposing. I know that they were saying a couple times detention, but I believe they're going to be retention ponds, which are going to be holding the water. The water that fills my wells are fed from natural springs that flow throughout that property next door. The reason I know that there is wells there, they did soil samples, went over there, drilled holes. We rode around with farmer Kenny Yeager this year, harvesting the field, and on the way in and out of the field this year, it was a very dry summer where we went about 2 months without rain. During harvest, looked down the hole, there's water. So that was proof enough to me that that's where the water is flowing down to my wells, developing, disturbing the property next door, the excavating. To me, it doesn't really make too much sense to put homes on natural springs just for water in the basement issues. But I got concerns that the quantity of my water might be disturbed, along with retention ponds, with the runoff from the streets in the wintertime. You got the salt on the roads, things like that, filling the retention ponds. Also possibly changing the quality of my water also. But I know that's a lot smaller from some of the bigger pictures and stuff like that, but that was my concern. The only other thing I really got to say is, the safety. There's just not enough safety going on coming out of the neighborhoods with where they're proposing to put the entrance. When I leave for work in the morning, I got the traffic from Hunterson coming from the west side, people heading back up towards Pippin Road, and it's heavy. You put a neighborhood on the other side of us, and you're getting just that much more traffic going to 27 in the mornings. I can only imagine what it's going to be like for me getting out on the main road in the morning. But we're not talking just passenger cars going up and down the street at 50 miles an hour. We're talking tractor trailers, garbage trucks, concrete trucks, equipment. We got a lot of stuff going up and down that road at high speeds, along with just the factor of, there is no plan for sidewalks. Even once you get up past the fire station and, all the way up to Pippin Road, the whole concern of the crosswalks all the way to school, with that, and just the amount of traffic and the possible cause for the accidents. I just want to know, you put in the development, everything's done, then you start seeing all the issues, the problems, heaven forbid a kid's hit, but at what point are you going to see too many accidents out there where you say, who's going to deal with the problem now? I think it's going to be us as neighbors in Colerain Township. It's not going to be MI to deal with it. It's now going to be somebody else's problem. So those were my concerns, and that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there another sworn speaker?
I got a 1 minute comment.
Yep, if he's already been sworn, sure.
Make sure you identify yourself.
Please identify yourself again.
I'd like to thank the trustees. I'm Calvin Hunter.
Okay, thank you.
Just like to thank the trustees for enduring the lengthy meeting here, but I'd like to invite you, first of all, to stop at the firehouse and look to the west at the property that they're proposing to put Abbey Homes, and then walk down a little bit down Kemper and just see what you feel with the traffic for the feel of what the sidewalk would be. So please stop in at the Firehouse 109 and take a look around in person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Was there another sworn speaker? Seeing that there are none, I guess our next step to close the public hearing, or questions and answers?
Though I think that there isn't deliberation tonight. So the idea tonight was there's public input, and then you have the opportunity to review the materials and then consider it on the 14th, I think, is when on the 14th, which is our next regular meeting, and that's when action will be proposed, and that's when motion will be made, seconded, and then deliberation occurs at that stage. But now's a good time to get clarifying questions answered from the experts that are in the room.
Okay. just say that we are to live off of the information we've received this evening. I've written down a lot of points people have made. And one of the questions was answered by Scott Huber about how did those undersized culverts ever get installed? Nobody knows. We talked about the stormwater. We talked about the pricing of the buildings. I don't have any questions at this time. I've just taken a lot of notes as I've gathered information here. And then I will comment about, several said we don't want to rush this through, and I heard one of the speakers say, let's just vote on this tonight. I don't really think we can do that because we need to notice that vote. I mean, legally advertise it, and I think with all the information here tonight, we'd be better off just take a little time to digest it, and I don't want to drag you people out 3 or 4 times, but I think it'd be best from a legal perspective to properly notice this and put it on the agenda at our next meeting.
Yes, sir.
So, should I ask for a motion to close the public hearing at this time?
I have a comment to make.
Okay.
This is the first night we heard both sides of the arguments, the stands, the concern of the residential. It seems to be, there is some comprehensive plan issues. How are we going to work it out? I think putting this resolution next meeting, 14th, is too soon. Give some time, both parties may get together or develop some plans, compromise, give some time. Right now, you got only less than, about 12 days. And it's just, it's a huge concern. It's not something that you do it in time. I think a lot of thinking, I took down a lot of notes. A lot of presentation we saw in both sides. It's which I never heard that before, and you get more time to think about it. Instead of rushing through it, let's put it in the resolution, let's pass it. I think that's not a good idea. I want more time to people, both parties, to think about it. Maybe come to the table. Have you ever done that? Both parties get together, come to the table, talk about the issues alone, or maybe one neutral person to administrate that, watch that meetings. There could be the way to find the solutions, or after that you come back and for the vote in the resolution. And this is 12 days is too soon to digest, like, I don't know what Dan said. I think more time to think about this. I want to know why so rush.
Did you have any comments, Mr. Waller?
Yes, it's been an education here for my first trustee meeting.
They're all like this.
Yeah, I think I just echo some of the other comments. Mr. Cowan? Is that Mr. Cowan? Yeah. I know you said, and I get that, it's unfair to keep bringing residents out here again and again. We're talking about, I don't know, what is it, Mr. Austin, a $22 million project. I mean, there's a lot of complicated moving parts, and I've heard a lot of stuff today that I really want to dig deeper on. And it's, like Mr. Unger, I have pages and pages of notes. So, and I think it's easy to kind of get distracted from some of the main questions, and that's why I think I need to go through it point by point. So I agree, and that tonight wouldn't be appropriate. I think there's a number of legal concerns too that probably need to be addressed as well. But I'd like to really thank you guys for coming out, and you guys said thank you for enduring it. Well, thank you for enduring this. This is the process. This is how it works, and sometimes it's a little bit deliberate and difficult. Everybody has done a fantastic job on presenting stuff on it, though. I think from both sides of the argument, I agree with Mr. Roger Capel. So I think with that, I will yield the rest of my time in my comments on that. But I think that it's going to be a complicated process to look at a lot of these questions.
Mr. Unger? Maybe now would be a good time to close the public hearing if there's no more questions of the board.
Want to make, please, just for the record, approach the mic and state your name again so Heather gets it in the minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was asking your indulgence to address the trustees one more time briefly. Thank you. Since the public hearing is still open, all I wanted to do was distribute a copy of my presentation, since you will be putting your decision off, so you have a written record of what I said during the...
Okay, is that this one, or which one is yours?
No, you didn't give.
Okay, yeah, please
Yes.
bring that up and give it to us. That will become part of the public record, so we'll have to have Heather scan all this stuff in.
Thank you.
Thank you. And if you have a copy for Mrs. Harlow, she can scan it in.
I'll take one too. No.
Okay, well, thank you, and I will go ahead and take it. Is there a motion to close? Oh, yeah, please, go ahead.
Hi, Ken Pitcher, 12,009 Pippin Road. I'm just unsure, what are we going to come back to? Can you tell us what the forum is going to be?
But I would also like to, once we close the public hearing, I'd like to have a public dialogue about what your expectation is for the next meeting.
Okay, yeah, you will hear an answer to that, but as far as the public hearing part of this, you will get an answer on when we're coming back before we leave here. It's just from a procedural point of view, I think you want to close the public hearing.
Okay.
But you'll find out if it's January 14th or whenever.
Well, not just so much the date, but actual, what are we expected to
Okay.
do? Because I'm hearing something about let the sides come together. I'm like, well, what are we supposed to come together on?
The purposes of public hearing are for
Let's go ahead and
testimony.
close the public hearing, and you will hear that discussion next. Okay. Is there a motion to, are you sworn in?
So close.
Can you wait till after we close the public hearing? I want to do this, I just want to do this right.
I don't think there's a
No,
public
It's
comment
not a
period.
back and
after.
forth,
Okay.
it's a public testimony.
Yeah,
for
we
public
have to
hearing.
do this right, because this sounds like something that's going to, however the trustees vote, this sounds like something that's going to go on for a while. So I want to make sure we're doing this legally correctly. So if it's time to close, the public hearing,
That's a legal issue for them. I mean, that's not an appropriate, I guess, consideration for the public hearing, I guess.
we will discuss that as soon as we close the public hearing. Okay, so is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I will motion to close the public hearing.
I second.
It's been motioned by trustee Wallert and seconded by Raj. Is there any discussion about closing the public hearing, fellow trustees? Hearing none. Heather, please call for a vote to close the public hearing.
Mr. Rajagopal?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
All right.
The public hearing is closed, and I'll wait for Mr. Mills's comments. He wanted to make a few comments now.
Okay, so there are timelines in the zoning resolution that dictate when things can and cannot happen, right? And so there's the clock is ticking, and so it's not a situation where things are getting rushed. It's a situation where we have to follow the law. And I believe, without it in front of me, I believe it's something like within 30 days of the zoning commission recommendation, the trustees have to take action.
So when does that 30 days tick off?
That's why January 14th was the day of action. And so I'm hearing different things from different trustees. I'm hearing Mr. Rajagopal say you would like to take more time. Unfortunately, the law doesn't allow us more time, so we're going to have to make a decision at some point. And one of the things that, some of the feedback that I need from you all tonight is what type of resolution do you want me to bring to you for consideration on the 14th, right? So we can do that in different ways. We can have that conversation here. You can
Well, we can have it right now.
email me what your thoughts are, and I can prepare two resolutions. If one trustee emails me and says, this is not for me, and the other says, yes, let's go 100%, I can prepare two resolutions for consideration. You can vote on those, but there is a clock that's ticking that we can't.
So is the question that you're asking us is, do we change the zoning from R4 to the requested zoning change. Is that what the question is?
That is the legislative act that you're being asked to consider, yes.
Okay, well then I'm one of the three. I would say bring us that question on the 14th. Is that?
Okay, yeah, and so in the resolution.
Comments from Raj and Matt.
Yep.
We can prepare both.
We'll prepare
If
both.
it's that simple of a question, do we change the zoning from what the developers, what it is, to what the developer is requesting, then bring us that question at our
Yes,
next
sir.
regularly scheduled meeting, which is on January 14th.
Yep, and to be candid, there are attorneys in the room, and this is a litigious situation. So, the resolution has to be, whatever your findings are, have to be, conclusions of law and findings of fact. You have to have those have to be based on the criteria that are in the zoning resolution. They have to be based on findings that you are considering from the public hearing tonight and from the record writ large, that it exists. And so you guys are going to have to, and we can create resolution outlines, and then you all can have a deliberation on the 14th, and you can come to your own conclusions, and we can include those conclusions into whatever resolution you'd like, but we do need to take action on the 14th. We can't prolong this.
So you've heard my comment that if it's as simple of a question as do we change the zoning from R4 to what the developer desires, if it's that simple of a question, then bring us that question.
Okay, and it'll be in.
But what do you say, Matt, and what do you say, Raj?
Oh, so I have a couple questions. So, but the resolution, whatever it says, has to reflect the 7 criteria.
It has to be based on those criteria, yeah.
So I noticed that when zoning looked at it, they had to come back and have a second meeting because they didn't explicitly list criteria that they followed.
broke in, they made a decision without really putting on the record their rationale for the decision. When you come back on the 14th, you're going to go ahead and have a vote, but you're going to go ahead and spell out in that vote why you voted that way and what was the basis for your decision.
But it does not need to be in the resolution, it just needs to be part of the record.
We're going to have an outline of it,
Okay.
and then we can go ahead and amend the resolution at that time.
On the fly. So we'll have a resolution that says, here's a resolution approving, here's a resolution denying, and then we'll have some whereas, therefore, or whereases
Right.
in there that say, based on the following findings of fact, we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we will listen to you as you say them, and and
See,
populate
that would
it.
be an example where you could table something till later in the meeting.
There you go.
Right.
That begs another question. So the second meeting where they laid out the criteria that the zoning used to make the decision, what date was that again? Is that the 9th
9th of November?
or 19th?
I think it's in the actual resolution. Looks like it was,
November 18th, right?
December 3rd is when the second meeting was.
Okay.
yes.
So it does, legally, I guess, does it matter? Was no action technically taken the first meeting because the criteria wasn't listed?
That was exactly the rationale, because we want to clarify, I had an understanding, but we didn't want to guess. We wanted to go ahead and make sure the resolution that was proposed was encompassed all of the
Right.
rationale, and there was additional rationale that was put in place as
Because
well.
there was a decision made by zoning on the first,
Yes.
but you feel confident that we didn't surpass that window?
What happened was there was a resolution to the zone, with the zoning commission, right, for approval. And that resolution failed.
It was just a motion.
A motion. Okay, and the way we used to do it in zoning, at the zoning commission was, you would have a straw poll vote at one hearing, and then that would give staff the opportunity to come back the next month with a resolution that reflected
Okay.
the rationale of, and so we eliminated that because at the time, the Board of Trustees wanted to speed development up because they were interested in having more development. And so they wanted that time frame to go faster. And so we eliminated some of those steps. In cases like this Abbeytown situation,
So my concern is that first meeting was a decision by not, but you're saying that wasn't.
And I'm sorry to kind of
Yeah, sorry.
move back to the other question. Pursuant to the resolution, a decision needs to be made within 20 days after today. So the 14th, Jeff is correct that
Okay.
a decision needs to be made within 20 days of today's public hearing.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you want to have a special meeting, we could do that.
Right.
But the next regularly scheduled meeting is on the 14th.
Speaking as one of the three, I'm fine with the 14th in that case.
Okay. Okay, so So my understanding now is that on the agenda on the 14th, I'm going to prepare 2 resolutions, and we will, you will come prepared with your rationale, and we will populate the findings during the meeting and have that resolution available for you to vote on, either for or against.
So you will present the 2 resolutions?
There'll be 1 for and 1 against.
There'll be outlines, general outlines.
All right, the first one doesn't favor anyone. It will favor anyone?
There'll be a for or against.
There will be
against.
one resolution that says,
Either for the builder or for the neighbors?
there will be one resolution that says we, the trustees, resolve to grant the zone map amendment. And the other one will say we deny the resolution.
And even if there's a granting of the amendment, it can include additional modifications that you're required to. And so that's another example of above and beyond what the staff is. Those are just different examples.
Okay, well, I'd prefer to give you time to get all this sorted out and individually, one at a time, get back to the trustees with exactly how this process works. I don't want to put you on the spot at 10:50 on a Thursday night, but and thanks to everybody who's carefully listening to our conversation. I do hear some chatter out there. This is really important stuff, and if whoever's chattering out there would pay attention to what's going on here, I'd appreciate it. So why don't you get this figured out?
A decision needs to be made on the 14th. I think that's
Make a decision
what
on
I'm
the
telling you. Or within 20 days of today's public hearing.
But whatever we need to do it exactly legally correct. So with that, thank you, and that's, so the folks that have spent your second day of the new year with us, thanks for coming. There's still more on the agenda, it's just one more item, so please stick around for a minute. So that's when it'll be, to answer your question, it'll be on January 14th in this room when our
7
meeting
p.m.
starts at 7 o'clock, and I would ask that you put it a little earlier in the agenda, so these folks don't end up sitting, we always want you to stay for the whole meeting, but kind of put it earlier in the agenda that night. And there's one more very important item on the agenda as we move along, and I will let you bring that up, Mr. Mills, the Dale Woods.
Thank you, Mr. President. The final item on the agenda tonight is a proclamation designating January 7th, 2020 as Colerain Police Officer Dale J. Woods Day in Colerain Township. The proclamation reads, whereas Police Officer Dale J. Woods began his law enforcement career with Colerain Police Department on March 31st, 2003, and whereas Police Officer Dale J. Woods served his community as a SWAT officer, training officer, bike officer, and supervisor, and whereas Police Officer Dale J. Woods lived a life of service as a police officer, a firefighter, and a dispatcher. And whereas Police Officer Dale J. Woods exemplified what a police officer should be. And whereas Dale J. Woods lost his life in the line of duty and in the brave service of the citizens of Colerain Township on January 7th, 2019. Now therefore be it resolved by the Board of Trustees of Colerain Township, Hamilton County, Ohio, do hereby designate January 7th, 2020 as Colerain Police Officer Dale J. Woods Day in Colerain Township. The recommendation is to sign that proclamation.
I move the motion to proclaim.
I'll second that. It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, Heather, please call for a vote.
Mr. Appleton?
Aye.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
Mr. Waller?
Aye.
Thank you, Board.
Our next item is adjournment, and I'll just say thanks again, everybody, for coming. And before I motion for adjournment, there's an event that night where we formally unveil the street sign. Could you give us a little detail on that, Jeff?
Yep, let me make sure I get the dates right here, the times. Hang on.
My understanding, it is right out here. When you pulled in here, there's a sign that says Heritage Way, and at our last meeting, we unveiled, Jackie, our Public Works Director, unveiled the Dale Woods Way sign, and I think we're going to have that installed by, I believe it's January 7th. And we will, I believe the street, Springdale Road, will be shut down at that time for folks to come out. I really hope you all do, because this has really been something.
Yes, Yeah, 5:30 to 6:30 on January 7th. The Springdale Road will be closed for a portion of Springdale Road right in front of Dale Woods Way here and Springdale. So encourage everybody to come out and celebrate his life.
And it's been a quick year since that very big funeral, and you would never think when you decide to run for trustee that you'd ever end up speaking at a police officer's funeral, and that's a tough thing, and any support that any of you can come out and show for Dale's family and his mother, I think they'll be here obviously that evening, and I really appreciate you all coming out, so.
Motion for adjournment?
I'll go ahead and, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been motioned and seconded. I don't think we take comments on adjournment, so, Heather, please call a vote.
Mr. Enscombe, my goodness.
It is late.
It's late. Mr. Rajagopal?
Yes.
Mr. Unger?
Aye.
And Mr. Waller?
All right.
The meeting is adjourned at 10:55 PM. Thank you.